Chapter 1. A Legacy of Stone and Salt. The air in the office was sterile, tasting of filtered circulation, and the faint, clean scent of plotter ink. Ronan Kerdrek rested his palms on a wide sheet of architectural vellum, the paper a smooth, cool plane under his skin. A web of precise graphite lines depicted the west elevation of a 16th-century merchant's house in Dinan. His firm, Kerdrek and Associates, specialized in this work, breathing life into structures that had stood for centuries, respecting their history while making them habitable for the present. His world was one of measurable things. Stress loads, material tolerances, the honest decay of oak and granite. He understood the language of old buildings. His phone vibrated against the solid wood of his desk. A single, insistent buzz. He ignored it. He was working, tracing the ghost of a mullioned window that had been bricked over sometime during the reign of Louis XIV. The vibration came again. He exhaled, a quiet sigh of irritation, and picked up the device. An unknown number local to the Morbihan department. He thumbed the screen to decline the call. A moment later, the same number sent a text. MONSIURKERDREC. CECONCRNEVOTRE GRANDONCLE YVES. Prior DEMECONTACTER. Urgent. He stared at the message. Grey Tuncle Eve. The name was a fossil from his childhood, a whisper of a strange old man who lived alone in a crumbling farmhouse somewhere south, near the great stones. A man his own father never spoke of. Ronan had not seen him in 25 years. He tapped the number. A woman answered, her voice weathered and official. Notaire's office, Ore. You are Monsieur Ronan Kerdrek. I am, Ronan confirmed, his own voice sounding hollow in the quiet of his office. I am Mater Fora. I regret to inform you of the passing of your great uncle, Yves Kerdrek. He was found this morning. Natural causes, it appears. Ronan stood. He walked to the wide window overlooking the rooftops of Rents. The city was a familiar geometry of slate and stone. He found he had no immediate emotional response. It was like hearing about the demolition of a building he had once seen a photograph of. An abstraction. I see. Thank you for letting me know. Monsieur Kerdrek, the notary continued, her tone shifting from sympathetic to professional. There is the matter of the will. Your great uncle was particular. He named you his sole heir. You inherit the property at Kurlan, outside Karnak, and its contents. Me, not my father. A pause on the other end. The testament is quite explicit. Your father, Jean-Luc Kerdrek, is mentioned only to be excluded. You are the sole beneficiary. This was less surprising. The silence between his father and great uncle was an old, deep trench. What does this entail? You will need to come to my office in Ore to sign the acceptance of succession, and you will need to take possession of the property. There are keys to be collected, affairs to be put in order. She listed the requirements in a dispassionate, practiced rhythm. Ronan looked at the plans on his desk. The merchant's house in Dinan seemed trivial now. He had a different old house to consider, a house belonging to a man he barely remembered, in a place he had only visited in the hazy memories of boyhood. I can be there tomorrow. The drive south was a slow transition from the ordered world of the Alayat Villain to the wilder coast of the Morbihan. The landscape flattened, the sky widened, and the air began to carry the sharp, briny tang of the Atlantic. He passed signs for Quiberon and La Trinité-sur-Mer. The world here felt older, the granite breaking through the soil in weathered outcrops. The notary's office was a modern, glass-fronted building that seemed out of place among Orway's medieval streets. Mater Fora was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and an expression of patient competence. She laid the documents on a polished table. Ronan signed where she indicated, his pen scratching against the thick paper. The house was his. "The keys," she said, pushing a small, heavy iron ring across the table. It held 3 keys. 2 were modern for the front and back doors. The third was different. It was old, hand-forged, its bit a complex, jagged pattern. This one was in a separate envelope with a note. "For the West Room," it says. Ronan pocketed the ring. Its weight was significant. "Did you know my great-uncle?" Mater Fora adjusted her glasses. "I met him once many years ago when he drafted this will. He was intense. He spoke a great deal about responsibility, about watching things. I confess I did not understand most of it." She gave him a thin, professional smile. "The house is about 10 kilometers from here. The address is in the packet. Good luck, Monsieur Kerdrek." The final turn was onto a narrow, unpaved track bordered by overgrown hedges. The car's tires crunched on gravel. After a few hundred meters, the lane opened onto a clearing. The house stood there. Kurlan was not charming. It was a long, low granite farmhouse that seemed to be sinking into the earth. The slate roof sagged in the middle. The wooden shutters, painted a faded blue, were mostly closed. A single gnarled apple tree stood sentinel in the overgrown yard. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, salt, and something else. Something like the smell of old paper left in a cellar. Ronan cut the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute, broken only by the cry of a distant gull. The modern key turned stiffly in the lock. The front door opened into a large, single room that served as a kitchen and living space. A thick layer of dust coated everything. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. A stone hearth, black with soot, dominated one wall. The place was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. It was the cold of a place long unheated and uninhabited. He moved through the ground floor. A small bedroom with a narrow bed neatly made. A pantry holding jars of what might have been pickled vegetables, now cloudy and suspect. Everything was tidy, Spartan, but layered with the film of neglect. He ran a finger along a windowsill, leaving a clean streak in the gray dust. Eve had been gone for a while, not just from life but from this house. Up a narrow, creaking staircase, he found 2 more rooms under the eaves. Both were empty, save for more dust and the scuttling of some unseen thing in the walls. He returned to the main room, the West Room. He looked at the far wall. There was only one other door on the ground floor beside the hearth. It was made of thick, dark wood, reinforced with iron straps. It had no knob, only a large, formidable lock that matched the old key on his ring. He approached it. The air near the door was colder still. He slid the iron key into the lock. It was a precise fit. He turned it. The mechanism inside was complex. Tumblers shifted with a series of heavy, grating clicks. The final turn released the bolt with a solid thunk that seemed to shake the very stone of the house. He pulled the door open. The smell hit him first. It was the smell he had detected outside, amplified 100 times. The dry, acidic scent of ancient paper, leather, and decaying ink. The room was a study, or a library, or a madman's office. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was obsessively, chaotically full. Bookshelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, crammed with volumes of all sizes. Some were modern paperbacks, but most were old, bound in cracked leather and faded cloth. Loose papers, maps, and diagrams were stacked on every available surface. A heavy oak desk, a worn armchair, the floor itself. The only light came from a single, grime-caked window, its shutter hanging open by a single hinge. Ronan stepped inside. He picked up a book from the desk. The title was in a language he did not recognize, its characters angular and strange. He opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous, handwritten notes in the margins, all in his gray-tunkle spidery script. He put it down and picked up a map. It was a modern geological survey map of the Karnak region, but it was covered in hand-drawn lines and symbols that connected the ancient stone rows, the dolmens, the tumuli. They formed a vast, intricate pattern, a circuit diagram laid over the landscape. He spent what felt like hours moving through the room, a privileged intruder in a life's work he could not comprehend. He found star charts, tide tables, linguistic texts on Proto-Celtic and Basque, treatises on metallurgy and acoustics, and journals, dozens of them. They were simple, black-bound ledgers, stacked chronologically on a low shelf. The most recent one was lying open on the desk. He sat in the creaking chair, the dust puffing up around him. He pulled the journal closer. The date on the page was from 6 months ago. The handwriting was shaky, but the same obsessive script he'd seen elsewhere. He read the first line. It is failing. The resonance has changed. A new tremor in the subharmonics. Millimeters of movement, but movement nonetheless. 6,000 years and it is failing. Ronan read on. The entry was a jumble of technical data and what sounded like paranoid delusion, mentions of the lock, the keystone, and the prisoner. He flipped back a few pages, more of the same. He turned to the very first journal in the collection, its cover soft with age. He opened it carefully. The ink was faded, the handwriting a younger, stronger version of the same hand. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago. Father is gone, Kurlan is mine, the duty is mine. He said I would understand when the time came. He said the stones speak to those of the blood who listen. I have gone to the alignments. I have sat before the menhirs. I hear nothing. I feel nothing. I am an engineer. I believe in what can be measured. This legacy is a folk tale, a madness passed from father to son. Ronan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. An engineer, like him. He looked around the room at the chaotic accumulation of a lifetime's research. Eve had started as a skeptic and ended here in this room, writing about subharmonics and failing locks. A slow, creeping unease began to work its way under Ronan's skin. This was not just the eccentricity of an old man. This was a methodical, documented obsession. He stood and walked to the grimy window. Through the distorted glass, he could see the last rays of the sun catching the tops of the trees. and beyond them, just visible on the horizon, a line of dark, upright shapes against the bruised purple sky. The stones of Karnak. They looked like teeth, like the pins of some colossal, long-abandoned machine. He returned to the desk, to the final, open journal. His finger traced the last sentence Eve had written, the ink slightly smeared as if his hand had been shaking badly. The frequency is wrong. It is no longer a hum. It is a whisper. It is calling a name. And something out there is beginning to listen. Ronan closed the journal. The heavy silence of the house pressed in on him. He was an architect. He dealt with the solid, the real, the explainable. But as he sat there in his gray Tunkel's chair, surrounded by the evidence of a 50-year descent into what he desperately wanted to call madness, a cold certainty settled in his gut. Whatever had consumed Eve Kerdrek's life was not over. It was just beginning, and it had been left to him. Chapter 2. The Imprint on the Stone. Inspector Isabelle Renaud stood with her hands in the pockets of her practical dark blue coat. The morning air was sharp, carrying the damp chill of a Breton autumn. Before her, the Menec alignment stretched away in silent, imposing rows. For thousands of years, these stones had stood here. They had seen everything. She wondered if they had ever seen anything like this. The victim, if that was the right word, was near the western end of the alignment where a small cromlech, a semicircle of stones, bordered the road. The first officer on the scene, a young gendarme named Corporal Lemaire, had made the call. His voice over the radio had been thin, strained. Now, standing a few paces away, Renaud understood why. There was a body, a man dressed in hiking clothes. He was slumped at the base of one of the larger menhirs, his posture oddly relaxed, as if he had simply sat down and gone to sleep. His head was tilted to one side, his eyes were closed. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. His pack lay beside him. His wallet and phone were in his pockets. This was not a robbery. Renaud walked a slow circle around the scene. The forensics team from Vans was on its way. She wanted to see it untouched first. "Lemaire," she said, her voice flat. "Inspector," the young man answered, stepping forward. He was pale. "Talk to me. What did you see?" The call came from a farmer just after sunrise. Said a man was passed out against the stones. I arrived, I checked for a pulse. Lemaire swallowed. There is none. He is cold, very cold. Anything else? Anything out of place? Lemaire hesitated. He glanced from Renaud to the stone and back again. The shadow, Inspector. Renaud's gaze followed his. She saw it. The sun was rising behind them, casting their long shadows westward. But on the stone, directly behind the dead man, was another shadow. It was dark, stark, and perfectly sharp despite the diffuse morning light. It was the precise silhouette of the man sitting in front of it, but the angle was wrong, utterly, physically wrong. The sun was to the east. This shadow was cast from the west, from a light source that did not exist. She crouched, careful not to disturb the ground. She looked at the man. He was young, maybe in his 30s. His face was peaceful, but his skin had a waxy, unnatural pallor. She looked closer at the stone. The shadow wasn't a shadow. It didn't flicker or move with the light. It looked less like a projection and more like a stain, a scorch mark. An imprint burned into the ancient granite. "Don't touch anything," she said, her voice a low command. "Tape this entire section off. 50-meter perimeter. I want no one inside except forensics. No press, no tourists, no one." Lemaire nodded, eager for a task. Renaud walked away toward her unmarked Peugeot. She needed to think. She had been a police officer for 18 years, a detective for 12. She had seen stabbings in St. Malo, drug deals gone wrong in Lorient, grim domestic tragedies in quiet villages. Every case had a logic, however twisted, a motive, a weapon, a cause and effect. This had none of that. This felt like a page torn from a different book entirely. The forensics team arrived, their white vans pulling up quietly. Renaud briefed the lead technician, a man named Giroux with a perpetually tired face. "No visible trauma," she told him, standing well outside the tape. "Wallet and phone are on him. Identity is probably Jean-Pierre Duval according to his driver's license. But the body is just the start. Look at the stone." Giroux squinted. He walked to the edge of the tape and peered at the impossible shadow. His professional detachment wavered for a second. "What the hell is that?" "You tell me," Renaud said. "I want everything. Temperature readings of the body, the stone, the air, full spectral analysis of that. Imprint, soil samples, air samples, and I want the autopsy done by Hauser in vans. I want her to do it personally. She's not going to like being pulled in on a weekend. She will like it less when I tell her I have a man who appears to have been killed by his own shadow. Tell her that. She'll be intrigued." Renaud spent the next hour watching the forensics team work. They moved with a quiet, efficient ballet, taking photographs, placing evidence markers, collecting samples in sterile bags. It was a familiar process applied to a completely unfamiliar scene. The incongruity was unsettling. Her phone rang. It was her Sergeant Matthew. "Inspector, we have a missing persons report. I think it might be related." "Go on." "A British tourist, Julian Calloway, 22 years old. His parents called the consulate in Paris this morning. Consulate called us. He was backpacking. Last communication was 3 days ago, a text to his mother. Said he was going to camp near the Karnak stones to see the sunrise. He was supposed to be in Roscoff yesterday to catch the ferry home. He never arrived." "A different man," Renaud mused. "Her victim was older, French. Send me the photo from his passport." A moment later, an image appeared on her screen. A young man with light brown hair and a friendly, slightly shy smile. "Could our victim have encountered him?" Matthew asked. "Possibly. Or this Calloway kid saw something and ran, or he's a victim somewhere else. Canvass all the local campsites, hotels, guest houses, see if anyone saw him, or if he was with anyone." She paused, looking at the team carefully bagging the dead man's hiking pack. "And get a team to search the surrounding area. The woods, the other alignments. Use a dog." She ended the call. 2 strange events, 1 location, 1 weekend. It was too much for coincidence. She walked back towards the scene. Giroux was standing by his van, pulling off his gloves. "Anything?" she asked. Giroux shook his head. His face was grim. "It's clean, too clean. No footprints near the body other than his own. No fibers, no hairs, nothing. It's like he just appeared there. The imprint on the stone is the strangest part. It's not a scorch. It's not a chemical stain. We ran a preliminary spectrograph. It's a molecular change in the top layer of the granite itself, like it was hit with some kind of radiation, something I've never seen before. And the body. Core temperature is 4 degrees Celsius. That's impossible. It's a mild morning. He should be at ambient temperature at least. 4 degrees is the inside of a refrigerator. He's been dead maybe 6, 8 hours, but he's colder than the ground he's sitting on. Renaud processed this. Every new piece of information made the puzzle more inexplicable. A man frozen from the inside out. A radiation burn in the shape of a shadow. A missing backpacker. "There's one more thing," Jairu said, lowering his voice. "We checked his phone. The victim, Duval. The last picture he took was last night around midnight. It's a photo of the stones here. It's dark, blurry, but there's someone else in the frame." He showed her the phone's screen. The image was grainy, illuminated only by a weak flash. It showed a few of the menhirs, and standing near one of them was a figure. A young man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by shadow. He was just standing there, watching. "Could be our missing Brit," Renaud said, her voice tight. "Send the image to the team doing the canvas. This Calloway kid just went from being a potential victim to our primary person of interest." Later that afternoon, Renaud was in the morgue in Vans. The room was cold, sterile, and smelled of antiseptic. Dr. Lena Hosser stood opposite her, a stainless steel table between them. The body of Jean-Pierre Duval lay on the table under a white sheet. Hosser was a tall woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was the best pathologist in the region, and she did not suffer fools. "Isabelle," she said, her voice dry, "you were right, I am intrigued." "And?" Hosser pulled back the sheet. Duval's body was pale and unremarkable. Externally, as you saw, nothing. No marks, no wounds, no signs of asphyxiation or poisoning in the preliminary toxicology. I have never seen a healthier-looking corpse. "But," Renaud prompted. "But," Hosser continued, tapping a finger on the man's chest. "Internally, it is a catastrophe. I started with the standard Y incision. The moment my scalpel touched the skin, I knew something was wrong. There was no cellular cohesion." "Explain that in French, Lena." "When you cut tissue, it resists. It has structure. His did not. It was like cutting through cold butter. Every organ is in the right place but the cells that make them up. They've lost their integrity. They're just collections of matter. The electrical potential in every single cell membrane is zero. From his brain to his bones, every cell in his body has ceased all biological function. Simultaneously." Renaud tried to grasp the concept. What could cause that? Hosser took off her glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. "Nothing I know of. Not a poison, not a disease, not a shock. There is no known medical or biological phenomenon that can do this. It's as if a switch was thrown and every light in the building went out at the exact same instant. He wasn't killed, Isabelle. He was turned off." Renaud felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morgue's temperature. She thought of the cold body, the impossible shadow. A man turned off. An imprint on a stone. She looked at the pathologist. "What do I write in my report?" Hosser shrugged, a small, helpless gesture that was deeply out of character. For the official cause of death, I have no idea. I will have to invent something. For your private investigation, I would say you are not looking for a human killer. You are looking for something else entirely." Renaud left the morgue and stood for a moment in the fading afternoon light. The methodical world of evidence and procedure she inhabited felt flimsy, a thin veneer over something dark and incomprehensible. She got in her car and drove, not back to her office, but back towards Karnak. She needed to see the stones again, to stand where Duval had died. She needed to look at the place where the impossible had happened and try to force it to make sense. As she drove, her phone buzzed with a message from Matthew. "Inspector, campsite owner near Mennek says the Callaway kid was there, kept to himself. Left 2 days ago, but he wasn't alone. The owner saw him talking to another man several times, an older man. Local, he thinks. Drives an old Citroen dying. Said the old man was agitated. Gave Callaway a book." Renaud's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. An old man, a local. The hunt had a new trail, a new ghost to chase through the ancient landscape. She pressed down on the accelerator, the engine whining in protest. Chapter 3: The Whispering in the Wires. Ronan did not sleep. He spent the night in the West Room, a fortress of paper and dust, fueled by stale coffee brewed on a small camping stove he found in the pantry. He worked by the light of a single, powerful architect's lamp he had brought from his car, its bright white beam cutting through the gloom and casting long, dancing shadows. He organized. It was the only thing he knew how to do when faced with chaos. He sorted the books by subject: geology, astronomy, folklore, linguistics. He unrolled the maps and charts, pinning them to a section of wall, creating a disturbing collage of scientific data and arcane symbols. And he read the journals. He read them chronologically, starting with Eva's youthful skepticism and following the 50-year progression into obsession. It was not madness. Ronan, the man of logic and reason, became certain of this in the cold, pre-dawn hours. Madness was erratic. This was methodical. Eve had applied his engineer's mind to an impossible problem. He had taken measurements, recorded data, formed hypotheses. He wrote of ley lines not as magical constructs, but as telluric energy channels. He documented the stone's minute vibrations, their subtle shifts in temperature during solar and lunar events. He called the entire Karnak complex a geological machine, a lock. And he wrote about its failure, a slow, entropic decay accelerated by a recent seismic event near the Azores, a tremor so minor it had gone unnoticed by the world, but which had, according to Eve, knocked a crucial tumbler loose. The lock was no longer sealed. It was leaking. Ronan found the news article just as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the grimy window. He had hooked his laptop up to a portable battery, tethering it to his phone's weak signal. He searched for local news from Karnak. The headline was stark: "Hiker found dead at Mennek alignment." He read the article. It was sparse on details. Man identified as Jean-Pierre Duval. No apparent cause of death. An investigation was underway, but a single sentence made Ronan's blood run cold. It was a quote from an unnamed source, a throwaway line about the bizarre circumstances, mentioning an unexplained marking on the stone. Ronan scrambled through the journals on the desk, his hands shaking slightly. He found the one from 10 years prior. Eve had documented a similar event, a sheep found dead in a field bordering the Kermario alignment. The description was chillingly familiar. The carcass was cold, unnaturally so. No predation. Beside it, on a flat stone, was the imprint, a perfect silhouette, the signature of a leak, a small release of pressure, the prisoner testing the walls. Ronan stood up, his joints aching. He walked to the wall of maps, the Menec alignment. According to his gray uncle's frantic diagrams, Menec was one of the primary conduits, a main artery of the machine. His own phone rang, the loud, modern chime shattering the ancient silence of the room. He snatched it from the desk, the same number as the notary. "Hello," he answered, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Ronan Kurdrak." The voice was female but ancient. It was thin and reedy, like the rustle of dry leaves. "Who is this?" "My name is Marguerite. I knew your great uncle. I knew your grandfather. I am a warden as you are, though my watch is almost over." Ronan gripped the edge of the desk. The name was in the journals, Marguerite Dubois, a fellow warden, a keeper of the spoken lore. He had assumed she was long dead. "How did you get this number?" "Eve gave it to me, years ago. He said you would answer when the time came. Has it come, Ronan? Have you been in the West Room? Have you read the words?" "I'm here, I've read them." A long, sighing breath from the other end of the line. "Then you know the lock is broken, the way is open, it is out." "What is out?" Ronan demanded, needing to hear it said plainly, to drag it out of the realm of esoteric scribblings and into the solid world of a phone conversation. "It has no name we can speak. It is the Shaper, the Walker of Paths, Ad Nurok. It was bound to the stone, and now it is bound to flesh. It needs a vessel to walk the world." Ronan thought of the news report, the missing backpacker. A man is dead at Menec. That is the imprint, the consequence of its passing. It sheds its old skin, its prison, and the energy leaves a mark. But the Shaper itself, it is in a new vessel now. A young one, I think, lost, frightened. It will use that fear, it will feed on it. A dog began to bark outside, a frantic, high-pitched sound. Ronan walked to the window, peering out into the morning mist. A small, scruffy terrier was in the yard, barking not at the house, but at the empty lane leading away from it. "What do I do?" Ronan asked, the question feeling absurdly inadequate. "The journals are the schematics, they are the how. But I am the where," Marguerite's voice rasped. "It will move, it must. It follows the old paths, the lines of power Eve mapped. It is weak now, disoriented. It will seek to anchor itself. It will head for the coast, for the old port at St. Gaustin in Ore. There is a nexus there, a place where the lines cross. It will try to draw power from it." The dog's barking grew more intense. "What do I do when I find it?" "You cannot kill the Shaper, not with knife or gun. You can only unbind it from the vessel. The tools are in the West Room. Eve would have prepared them. You must find the Riddle de Déliement, the unbinding. But you must be close. You must be prepared. It will defend its new body." Ronan looked around the chaotic room, a lifetime of research to sift through. That could take days. You do not have days, Marguerite's voice was sharp, urgent. It will grow stronger, it will learn its new form, the host, the boy, it will consume him, his mind, his memories. Soon there will be nothing left of him, only the shaper wearing his face. Go to St. Gaustin, look for the signs, the cold places, the whispers in the air, the wrongness in the geometry. You will know, you are a Kerdrek, the legacy is in your blood, now go. The line went dead. Ronan stood in the silence, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dog had stopped barking. He looked at the journals, the maps, the lifetime of obsession that was now his. A legacy, a duty, a madness. He began to search, not for understanding anymore, but for tools. He pushed aside stacks of paper on the desk, his hands moving with a new urgency. Under a pile of tied charts he found it, a flat, leather-wrapped case. He unfastened the straps. Inside, nestled in velvet that had long since rotted, were three objects. A compass, but its needle was not magnetic. It was a sliver of polished obsidian that spun erratically. A heavy silver locket, intricately carved with the same symbols that covered the maps. And a dagger. Its blade was short, leaf-shaped, and made of a dull, gray metal that seemed to absorb the light. It was cold to the touch, a cold that felt ancient and absolute. He found the ritual description in a small, separate ledger tucked inside the case. It was not a spell. It was a set of instructions, as precise and technical as any architectural specification. It involved the compass, the locket, and the dagger. It spoke of resonance, of severing metaphysical tethers, of grounding a displaced consciousness. It required proximity, and it required the host to be incapacitated. He wrapped the items and the ledger in an oilcloth and put them in his satchel. He took one last look around the west room. It was his inheritance, a burden of stone and salt and shadows. As he walked out the front door, the scruffy terrier was sitting by his car, wagging its tail tentatively. It looked hungry and lost. On an impulse, Ronan opened the back door of his car. The dog jumped in without hesitation, curling up on the back seat. He did not know why he did it. Maybe it was the thought of not being completely alone. He drove away from Kurland, the dog a silent passenger. He headed for Auray, for the old port of St. Gaustin. He was no longer an architect, he was a hunter. He was chasing a ghost in a machine, an ancient horror wearing the face of a missing boy. He clutched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He had no idea what he was doing, armed only with a madman's journal, a strange set of tools, and a desperate, whispered warning from an old woman on the phone. The hunt had begun. Chapter 4, Where the Paths Cross. The old port of St. Gaustin was a postcard from another century. It huddled at the bottom of a steep valley, cradled by the river Loch. A medieval stone bridge arched over the water, connecting the quay to the main town of Auray on the hill above. The quay itself was a crescent of half-timbered houses and granite buildings, their facades leaning against each other as if for support. It was a place Ronan knew well from architectural surveys. He understood its bones, the way the ancient structures had settled over centuries. Today, it felt different, alien. He parked his car on the upper road and walked down the steep, cobbled ramp that led to the port. The dog, which he had decided to call Chin for lack of a better name, trotted at his heels. The air was cool and damp. Tourists milled about, taking photos, sitting at the outdoor tables of the creperies. It was a scene of perfect, ordinary life. Ronan felt like a saboteur, a man carrying a bomb into a garden party. He walked the length of the quay, his eyes scanning everything, looking for what Marguerite had told him to find. The cold places, the whispers, the wrongness in the geometry, but everything looked normal. The granite was solid. The angles were true. The only cold was the breeze off the river. He felt a surge of doubt. He was a man with a strange knife in his bag, chasing a monster from a fairy tale on the advice of a ghost on the telephone. It was insane. He stopped at the center of the quay, near the squat stone structure that had once been the town's lockup. According to his great-uncle's maps, this was the nexus, the point where several lines of power converged. He took the compass from his satchel. He cupped it in his hands, shielding it from view. The obsidian needle spun wildly, a black blur before settling. It did not point north. It pointed directly at the stone bridge. Ronan stared at the bridge. It was empty save for a few people crossing. Nothing seemed out of place. He started walking towards it, Chin keeping pace beside him. As he drew closer, the dog began to whine, a low, unhappy sound. Its ears flattened against its skull. He stepped onto the bridge. The air changed. The cheerful sounds of the port, the chatter of voices, the clinking of glasses faded as if a thick blanket of felt had been dropped over the world. The temperature plummeted. It was a sudden, unnatural cold that bit at his exposed skin. He could see his breath misting in front of him. A family walking towards him from the other side shivered, the father rubbing his wife's arms. "Drôle de courant d'air," the man muttered as they passed. "A strange draft." Ronan continued to the center of the bridge, to its highest point. The obsidian needle in his hand was now perfectly still, rigid as if welded in place, aimed at a spot on the stone parapet. He looked at the spot. It was just stone, weathered and covered in moss. He reached out a hand, hesitating. His fingers brushed the surface. The shock was not electric. It was a plunge into ice. A wave of profound, absolute despair washed over him. It was not his own feeling, it was alien, an agony so pure and deep it felt like it could extinguish stars. He saw a flash of imagery in his mind's eye, a boy's face, pale and terrified. Julian Calloway. The boy was crying, his mouth open in a silent scream. And behind his eyes something else looked out. Something vast, cold, and utterly without pity. Ronan snatched his hand back as if burned. He staggered, gasping, leaning against the opposite parapet. The vision, the feeling, it all vanished. The sounds of the port rushed back in. The air was cool but no longer freezing. He was just a man standing on a bridge, but he knew. The Shaper had been here. It had stood right there, leaning on that stone, drawing power from the nexus. It had left an echo of passage. He looked around wildly. Where had it gone? He consulted the compass again. The needle wavered, then pointed unsteadily up the hill, towards the main town. The path it followed was a steep, narrow lane named Rue du Château, a staircase of worn stone steps that snaked up between the old houses. He started up the steps, taking them two at a time. Chin bounded ahead of him. The lane was shadowed, empty. He felt a growing sense of dread, the feeling of being too late. He reached the top, emerging onto a small, quiet square behind the main church. A few cars were parked here. Nothing. He was about to turn back when Chin started barking. The dog was standing by a small, blue Renault, its tail rigid, a low growl rumbling in its chest. The car was unremarkable except for one detail. The driver's side window was covered in a film of condensation despite the mildness of the day, and on the inside of the glass a single, clear handprint was visible. From the palm of the print, thin, dark rivulets of a black, oily substance had trickled down the glass. The weeping glass. Ronan's heart hammered. He was close. He peered through the passenger window. The car was empty. A jacket was thrown on the passenger seat. A map of Brittany lay open on the dashboard. He moved to the front of the car, and then he saw it. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a parking ticket. He leaned closer to read the time stamp. It had been issued less than 20 minutes ago. He was here now. Ronan straightened up, his mind racing. Where would he go? A hotel? A cafe? He pulled out his phone and quickly searched for hotels in the immediate vicinity. Two came up. One was a modern chain hotel on the main road. The other was a small, family-run place just off the square, the Hotel Le Cadoudal. It was old, its name a reference to a famous local royalist rebel. It seemed more likely. He crossed the square, Jean trotting silently beside him now. The entrance to the hotel was a modest wooden door. He pushed it open and stepped into a small, dark lobby that smelled of wood polish and stale coffee. A man with a tired face and a large mustache sat behind the reception desk, reading a newspaper. "Bonjour," Ronan said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man looked up over his reading glasses. "Bonjour, monsieur. No dogs," he said, nodding at Jean. "He'll wait outside," Ronan said quickly. He pushed the dog gently back out the door and let it close. "I'm looking for a friend, a young man, English. He was supposed to meet me here." He gave a description of Julian Calloway. Light brown hair, 22, maybe carrying a backpack. The hotelier's eyes narrowed slightly. He put down his paper. "I might have a young man like that, checked in this morning, paid in cash for one night. Room 7. He gestured with his thumb towards the staircase. "He was very quiet, looked ill if you ask me, pale." "Is he in his room now?" "He came down about half an hour ago, asked for directions to the train station, left his pack in the room, said he would be back for it later." The man shrugged. "Hasn't come back yet." The train station, of course. The paths of iron, another line of power. Ronan's mind spun. He was losing the trail. He needed to get to the station. "Thank you," he said, turning to leave. As his hand touched the doorknob, something made him pause. He looked back at the hotelier. "Has anything strange happened since he checked in?" The man hesitated. He looked uncomfortable. "It is an old hotel, monsieur. The wiring. It is not what it should be. The lights have been flickering on the second floor, and the telephone in room 7, it makes a sound, a whisper, even when it is on the hook." He shook his head, dismissing it. "I need to call an electrician." A whisper in the wires. It was happening again. The entity was growing stronger, its presence warping the world around it. "Thank you for your help," Ronan said again and hurried out of the hotel. He called Jean and began running, not towards his car, but directly through the streets of Ore, towards the train station a kilometer away. He was gambling. The shaper was on foot. He might still be able to catch it. He ran through the narrow streets, his satchel bouncing against his hip, the weight of the strange dagger a cold, heavy promise. Meanwhile, Inspector Isabelle Renaud's Peugeot entered Ore from the west. She had spent the last hour at the campsite where Julian Calloway had stayed. The owner had confirmed the detail about the older man and the book. He had also provided something else. Calloway had used the site's communal kitchen. He had left a water bottle behind. Forensics had lifted a perfect set of prints from it. They were running them now, but Renaud knew what they would find. Her phone rang. It was Sergeant Matthew. "Inspector, we got a hit on the credit card of our victim, Duval." "Where?" "A bookstore in Vans, 2 days ago. The store has security cameras. I'm sending you the still now." Renaud's phone chimed. She pulled over to the side of the road and looked at the image. It showed Jean-Pierre Duval at the counter of a bookstore, and standing next to him, talking to him, was an older man with a gaunt face and wild gray hair. It was the same man from the campsite, the same man who had given the book to Julian Calloway. He had connected the victim and the missing boy. He was the key. "We have his face," she said into the phone. "Get this picture to every gendarmerie in the department. I want him identified. This man is our nexus." She ended the call and was about to drive on when another message came through. It was from forensics. It was a single sentence. "Prints from campsite water bottle match prints from driver's side window of blue RENAULT, parked behind St. Gildas Church. AURAY." Renaud's blood went cold. He was here, in this town, now. She spun the car around, tires squealing, and accelerated towards the town center. She radioed for backup, her voice sharp and commanding. "All units converge on St. Gilda's Church in Ore. Our person of interest, Julian Calloway, is in the vicinity. Subject is to be considered dangerous. Approach with caution." She did not know why she added the last part. It was instinct. The frozen body the man turned off, the impossible shadow on the stone. This was not a simple case of a missing person. She felt it in her bones. She was not hunting a lost tourist. She was hunting a monster. Two hunters were now converging on the same prey. One armed with ancient ritual and a strange knife, the other with the logic of the law and the force of the state. And at the Ore train station, a young man with haunted eyes stood on the platform, waiting for a train that would take him north, towards Paris, towards the largest nexus of them all. He stood perfectly still, but around him the air shimmered, and the lights on the platform flickered in time with a heartbeat that was not his own. The hunt was about to become a collision. Chapter 5. An intersection of iron and bone. The train station at Ore was a place of transit, of brief intersections. People arrived, people departed. Lives brushed against each other for a moment before diverging again. Ronan burst onto the main concourse, his breath ragged, his eyes scanning the departures board. Paris. Platform B departing in 4 minutes. He sprinted through the station, dodging travelers pulling suitcases, his satchel slapping against his side. He pushed through the doors to the platforms. The train for Paris was there, its diesel engine a low thrum in the afternoon air. People were boarding, finding their seats. Platform B, he ran along its length, his gaze sweeping the windows, looking for a young man with light brown hair. He saw him. He was standing at the far end of the platform, away from the other passengers, near the service stairs that led down to the underpass. It was Julian Calloway. Ronan recognized him instantly from the photo and the news articles he had seen online. He was wearing a dark hoodie, his frame thin, his posture slumped. He was staring at the tracks, his expression vacant. Ronan slowed his pace, walking now, trying to calm his breathing to think. Marguerite's warning echoed in his mind. The host must be incapacitated. How was he supposed to do that here on a crowded platform? He touched the shape of the dagger through the cloth of his satchel. It was impossible. He needed to get him away from the train, away from the crowd. "Julian," he called out. He did not know if it was the right move, but it was the only one he could think of. The young man's head snapped up. His eyes met Ronan. For a fleeting second, Ronan saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated terror in them, a recognition, a plea. It was the boy, the real Julian. Then just as quickly it was gone. The eyes became flat, cold, and ancient. A subtle, chilling smile touched the corner of the young man's mouth. It was not a human expression. It was the look of a predator that has just spotted an interesting new specimen. The entity, Odd Nurok, took a step back, not in fear but in assessment. It tilted its head, a gesture that was bird-like and unnatural. A low hum seemed to emanate from it, a vibration that Ronan felt in the soles of his shoes. The overhead lights on the platform flickered violently. A baby in a nearby carriage began to scream. The train's whistle blew, a sharp, piercing sound. The doors began to close. The shaper turned its back on Ronan and with a smooth, fluid motion, stepped onto the train. The doors slid shut behind it. "No!" Ronan yelled. He lunged forward, but it was too late. The train began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed. Through the window, Ronan could see the hosted Julian, standing in the aisle, watching him. The cold, analytical smile remained on his face. Then he turned and walked deeper into the carriage, disappearing from view. Ronan stood helpless on the empty platform, the smell of diesel fumes thick in the air. He had failed. He had been meters away and he had failed. The entity was gone, heading for Paris, a city of 10 million souls, a nexus of unimaginable power. He was still standing there, his mind a maelstrom of failure and panic, when a hand fell on his shoulder. "Police, ni bouges pas." Ronan spun around. Two uniformed gendarmes stood behind him, their faces hard, their hands near their holsters. And just behind them, walking calmly towards him, was a woman in a dark blue coat. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Ronan Kerdrek," Inspector Isabelle Renaud asked. Her voice was calm but held an unmistakable edge of authority. Ronan's mind raced. He was a man who had just chased someone onto a train, yelling his name. He had a bag containing a strange knife and a madman's journal. He was, in every conceivable way, a suspect. Yes. "I am Inspector Renaud. I have some questions for you. I think it would be best if we continued this conversation at the station." She glanced at the satchel he clutched in his hand. "You will come with us." It was not a request. The interrogation room was a small, beige box. The air was stale. Ronan sat at a metal table, his satchel on the floor beside his chair. They had not searched it yet. A small, professional courtesy or perhaps an oversight. He hoped it was an oversight. Inspector Renaud sat opposite him. She slid a file onto the table but did not open it. She just watched him, her gaze analytical. "Let us start with something simple, Monsieur Kerdrek," she said. "Your great uncle, Yves Kerdrek, he died 3 days ago. You inherited his property. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you are here in Ore, chasing a young man named Julian Calloway, who is a person of interest in a homicide investigation. A homicide that occurred at the Karnak Stones, very near your great-uncle's property. Do you see how that looks?" "I can explain," Ronan began, but the words felt hollow even to him. "Please do," Renaud said, leaning forward slightly. "Explain to me why we have a witness who saw your great-uncle, a few days before he died, giving a book to this same Julian Calloway. Explain why another witness, the victim of our homicide, bought a book from a shop while your great-uncle stood beside him. Explain why you are here. Explain what is in the bag." Ronan looked from her unwavering gaze to the satchel on the floor. He had two choices. He could lie, invent a story that would fall apart under the first moment of scrutiny, or he could tell the truth. The impossible, insane truth. He thought of the cold smile on Julian's face. He thought of the train pulling away, carrying that wrongness towards Paris. He took a deep breath. "My great-uncle did not study folklore, Inspector. He studied a machine, a lock, and it's broken. The man you found at Menek, he wasn't murdered, he was erased. It was the energy discharge from a prison break. And Julian Calloway is not your killer. He is the first victim. He's a vessel, a host for the thing that escaped." He spoke calmly, laying out the core of Eva's research. He talked about the shaper, the lines of power, the nexus. He knew how it sounded. He could see it in her face. Her expression did not change, but a subtle hardening came into her eyes. It was the look of a professional dealing with a lunatic. "A vessel," she repeated, her voice flat. "And what were you planning to do to this vessel, Monsieur Kerdrek, with the tools your great-uncle no doubt left for you?" "There is a way to separate them, to unbind the entity from the host. It's a procedure." "I see," Renaud said. She stood up. "Thank you for your cooperation." She walked to the door. "Sergeant, search his bag." Two officers entered. One stood by the door while the other, a burly man, picked up the satchel. He unfastened the straps and emptied its contents onto the table: the leather case, the compass, the silver locket, and the dagger. The officer picked up the blade, holding it awkwardly. "What is this?" Renaud stepped forward and looked at the objects. She picked up the small ledger, the one with the instructions for the ritual. She opened it, her eyes scanning the precise, handwritten text. Her expression was unreadable. She looked at Ronan. "You are an architect from Rents, good firm, respected. You have no criminal record, and yet here you are with this. A story about a cosmic entity and a bag full of what looks like paraphernalia for a black mass. You are chasing a boy who is at the center of a homicide, and you claim you want to perform a procedure on him with this." She held up the dagger. Ronan said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Renaud placed the ledger back on the table. She seemed to come to a decision. "I am holding you for 48 hours, obstruction of a police investigation. We will see what we can find in that time. We will find Julian Calloway, and we will find the truth." She turned and left the room. The door closed with a heavy, final click. Ronan was alone with the two officers and the remnants of his impossible mission spread across the table. He was a prisoner, and the Shaper was on a train to Paris, growing stronger with every kilometer that passed. He had not just failed. He had been removed from the board entirely. As he sat there under the flat, humming lights of the interrogation room, he felt a faint vibration through the concrete floor. It was a rhythmic, pulsing tremor, so subtle he thought at first he was imagining it. It was the feeling of a distant train, speeding down the tracks, carrying its single, monstrous passenger into the heart of the world. Chapter 6: The Geometry of a Crowd. The Gare Montparnasse was a cathedral of noise and movement. Its vast, glass-roofed hall echoed with the cacophony of 1,000 lives in transit. The rumble of trains, the automated announcements in crisp, disembodied French, the babble of countless conversations, the squeal of luggage wheels on polished floors. It was a human river, a torrent of arrivals and departures. For Adnurok, it was a symphony. It stepped off the train from Ore, a young man in a dark hoodie moving through the crowd. It wore the body of Julian Calloway like a borrowed coat, still not a perfect fit, but it was learning. The host's residual terror was a fading hiss, a static it was quickly learning to tune out. The overwhelming sensory input of the station, however, was intoxicating. Every person was a node of energy. Every hurried path from platform to exit, every emotional farewell, every anxious glance at the clock, they all created pathways, lines of intention and desire that crisscrossed the station in a dazzling, invisible geometry. In the wild emptiness of Karnak, it had drawn power from the slow, deep currents of the earth. Here, in this confluence of human will, the power was sharp, fast, and exhilarating. It was like tasting sugar after a lifetime of stone. It walked, not with purpose, but with instinct. It let the currents of the crowd guide it. It did not need a map. The city itself was a diagram of power, and this station was one of its primary hearts. It could feel the great arteries of the metro beneath its feet, pulsing with trains like blood cells in a vast, sleeping creature. It could feel the weight of the old city, the deep wells of history and memory that lay under the modern concrete. A man carrying a briefcase bumped into it, muttering a quick, "Pardon, monsieur," without looking. For a microsecond, as their shoulders touched, the Shaper tasted his mind. Anxiety about a business meeting, a fleeting memory of his daughter's smile, the dull ache of a forgotten lunch. The information was trivial, useless, but the access was effortless. It was learning the language of this new world. It came to a halt in the center of the main hall, beneath the huge, suspended departures board. The letters and numbers flickered and changed, a constant stream of information. Adnurok tilted its head, the gesture still slightly too sharp, too precise for the human form it inhabited. It wasn't reading the destinations. It was watching the patterns, the flow of energy they directed. It was observing the fundamental mechanics of this new environment. Its attention was drawn to a young woman crying softly into her phone, her back against a concrete pillar. Her distress was a beacon, a spike of raw, emotional energy. The Shaper drifted towards her, an explorer drawn to a strange new star. It stood a few feet away, simply observing. Non-mammon je comprends mais. The woman sobbed, her words choked. I understand, but he's gone. The grief was a pure, potent frequency. Adnurok felt a resonance with the host's lingering despair. It reached out, not physically, but with a tendril of its consciousness. It wanted to dissect this feeling, to understand its texture. As its focus touched the woman, the lights directly above her flickered and died. A nearby digital advertising screen dissolved into a waterfall of multicolored static. The woman, lost in her own sorrow, noticed none of it. Adnurok withdrew. The effect was crude, unintentional, a side effect of its growing power interacting with the host's chaotic human emotions. It needed control. It needed a place of quiet, a place to anchor itself and fully integrate with its vessel, a place where the lines of power were strong, but the human noise was less distracting. It scanned the mental map of the city that was slowly forming in its perception. It bypassed the obvious sights, the Eiffel Tower, a garish spike of brute force, the Louvre, a chaotic jumble of stolen, screaming memories trapped in paint and stone. It was looking for something older, something with a more fundamental geometry. And then it found it, a resonance that hummed with a power similar to that of Karnak but different. Not a lock, but a foundation, a place of deep, ordered silence and immense weight, a place built of bone. The Paris catacombs. It turned and began to move, its path now clear and direct. It flowed through the crowd, a shark gliding through a school of fish, and descended into the poolsing depths of the metro. The journey was a sensory overload. The screech of the train's wheels on the track was a physical pain, a frequency that interfered with its own resonance. The press of bodies in the carriage was a constant, irritating static of stray thoughts and emotions. It stood near the doors, its eyes closed, focusing on the destination, filtering out the noise. It emerged at Denver-Trocero Station. The name itself felt significant. The street was busy, but the overwhelming chaos of Montparnasse was gone. Across the road was a small, unassuming green building, the entrance to the catacombs. A queue of tourists snaked away from the door. Adnurok had no interest in the queue. The official entrance was for cattle. It was looking for a different way in. It walked away from the entrance, following a subtle pull, a whisper from the ground beneath. It moved through the back streets, its borrowed eyes scanning the architecture. It was looking for a sign, a point of access to the network of tunnels that spread for hundreds of kilometers beneath the city. It found it in a small, gated park, locked for the evening. In the center of the park was a circular stone structure like a well head, capped with a heavy iron lid. It was an old quarry inspection shaft, one of hundreds that dotted the city. A forgotten doorway. The lock on the park gate was a triviality, a moment of focused intent, a subtle manipulation of the rusted metal tumblers, and it clicked open. Adnurok slipped inside, closing the gate behind it. It approached the shaft. The iron lid was immense, held down by corrosion and its own dead weight. It would take several strong men to lift it. The shaper placed Julian's hands on the cold iron. It did not try to lift the lid with muscle. The human body was laughably weak. Instead, it closed its eyes and reached down, not into the earth, but into the very nature of the object. It found the molecular bonds of the rust, the internal stresses in the iron. It found the pathways of cohesion that held the lid together and to its stone frame. And it whispered to them. It suggested a new geometry, a new way of being. With a deep, groaning screech of tortured metal, the lid slid sideways, scraping a channel in the stone. A round, black hole opened up in the ground, exhaling a breath of cold, subterranean air that smelled of damp limestone and dust and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. Without hesitation, Odnurok swung the body of Julian Calloway over the edge and dropped into the darkness. The fall was only a few meters. It landed silently on a pile of debris at the bottom of the shaft. The darkness was total, absolute. For the first time since leaving its prison, the Shaper felt a semblance of peace. The riot of color and light and sound was gone. Here, there was only silence and the magnificent, ordered dark. It could see, but not with Julian's eyes. It perceived the space around it as a web of pathways, a three-dimensional map. A tunnel led away from the bottom of the shaft. It began to walk, its steps sure and silent. It was moving deeper into the network, towards the section known as the municipal ossuary, towards the ordered kingdom of the dead. As it walked, it began the real work, the final integration. It delved into the mind of its host, sifting through the remaining fragments of Julian Calloway. It found memories of his childhood, the taste of his mother's baking, the feeling of scraping his knee on a playground. It found his hopes, his fears, his first love, his deepest regrets. It did not destroy them. It consumed them. It absorbed them, making them part of its own expanding consciousness. It was learning what it meant to be human, not by observation, but by assimilation. The boy's last vestiges of self, his final, terrified awareness, flared for a moment, a candle in a hurricane. Please, no. And then it was gone. The candle was extinguished. The mind was wiped clean. The vessel was now an empty, perfect shell, inhabited by a single, cold, and ancient will. Odnurok stopped. It stood in the center of a narrow tunnel, the limestone walls pressing in close. It lifted a hand, flexing the fingers. The movement was no longer a mimicry. It was its own. It touched its face, feeling the strange texture of skin, the shape of the nose, the curve of the lips. The coat now fit perfectly. It continued its journey, its pace faster now, more assured. It was heading for the Empire of Death, a place where 6 million souls were arranged in walls of perfect, silent geometry. A battery, a library, a throne room. Here it would rest. It would consolidate its power, and from here it would begin to reshape the world above. Chapter 7. The Echo in the File. The gendarmerie in Ore smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. For 24 hours, Ronan had been in a holding cell that was little more than a concrete box with a bench. They had given him food, allowed him to use the toilet. They had not spoken to him. It was a classic interrogation tactic, isolation and uncertainty, designed to soften a subject up. But Ronan was not a criminal. He was a man with a ticking clock in his head, and the silence was a form of torture. The cell door opened. It was Inspector Renaud. Her face was tired, etched with lines of frustration. "Come with me," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She led him not to the interrogation room but to a small, cluttered office. Files were stacked on every surface. A computer monitor showed a map of Paris. She gestured to a chair. "We identified your Grey-Tunkle's associate," she began, sitting behind the desk. "The man at the bookstore, the man at the campsite. His name was Alain Legoff, a retired history professor from the University of Nantes, specialized in pre-Roman Celtic culture. He was found in his apartment in Nantes this morning. He's been dead for at least 3 days." Ronan waited, saying nothing. "Cause of death," Renaud continued, her eyes fixed on him, "was a massive, self-inflicted wound. But before he died, he covered every wall, every surface of his apartment with writing, symbols, diagrams, the same kind of patterns we found in your Grey-Tunkle's house, the same kind of patterns from the ledger we took from you." She slid a photograph across the desk. It was a crime scene photo of a room that looked disturbingly like the West Room at Curlan, but smeared with blood and desperation. "He also left a note," Renaud said. "A suicide note addressed to the police. It's 4 pages long. In it he claims to be part of an ancient society responsible for guarding something at Karnak. He says they failed. He says a being he calls the Shaper has escaped. He says it has taken a human host. He says it must be stopped before it reaches a major nexus and consolidates its power. He says we have no tools to fight it. He says the only hope was the Kurdrek legacy." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Does any of this sound familiar?" Ronan felt a sliver of hope, sharp and painful. "You believe me." "I believe," she said carefully, "that I have 2 dead men, one of them a respected academic and a missing boy at the center of it all. And both men tell the same impossible story. I don't believe in monsters, Monsieur Kurdrek, but I believe in patterns, and the pattern here is terrifying." She leaned forward. "We tracked Julian Calloway. He used his credit card once before he discarded it to buy a ticket for the metro at Montparnasse. We have him on camera entering the system. We have no footage of him exiting. He vanished. A boy in one of the most heavily surveilled cities in the world simply vanished." "The catacombs," Ronan said, the word a sudden, certain realization. "He's gone underground. It's a nexus. All that death, all that order, it would call to him." Renaud stared at him. "How could you know that?" "The maps, my Grey-Tunkle's maps. He didn't just map Karnak. He mapped the major lines across Europe. Paris is a hub. The historical center, the river, the catacombs. They form a triangle of immense power." Renaud was silent for a long moment. She picked up a pen, turning it over and over in her fingers. "The official search for Calloway is focused on the transport hubs, hotels, youth hostels, standard procedure. But I have a small team on standby, my own people. They are off the books." She looked him directly in the eye. "Last night there was a power surge in the monitoring station for the Paris catacombs. A section of the network, an old, unmapped quarry system near Denfert-Trachero, went dark. All sensors failed. At the same time, an alarm was triggered from a surface-level inspection shaft in the nearby square Claude Nicolas Ledoux, a shaft that is supposed to be sealed." Ronan leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "You have to let me go. I am the only one who knows what to do. the ritual, the tools. I cannot release a man who is connected to a homicide investigation and let him run around Paris with a knife, chasing shadows, she said, her voice firm, the professional cop back in control. It's impossible. Then you have already lost. By the time your team gets through the red tape to enter that section of the network, he will be gone or he will be too strong to be stopped. You don't understand what you are dealing with. It doesn't follow human rules. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't need to eat. It only needs to anchor itself. And when it does, it will start to change things, not just flickering lights. It will change the city, the people. Renaud stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sleepy afternoon streets of Ore. When I was a rookie, my training officer told me something. He said 99% of police work is procedure. You follow the rules, you fill out the forms, you trust the system, because the system works. But 1% of the time, you will face something that is not in the manual, something that breaks all the rules. And in that moment, you have to choose between being a good cop and doing what is necessary. She turned back to face him. Her expression was hard, resolute. I am giving you a choice, Monsieur Kerdrek. I can keep you here. You will be safe in this cell, or I can look the other way for 5 minutes while you walk out the back door. Your bag will be on the evidence desk by the exit. If you walk out that door, you are a fugitive. I will have to issue a warrant for your arrest. I will have to hunt you. You will be on your own, but you will be in Paris by morning. She was offering him a chance, an insane, career-ending chance on her part, a lifeline. My dog, Ronan said, the thought suddenly striking him. They took him to the local pound. Renaud gave him a look that was almost a smile. The back door is near the impound lot. Keys get left in cars all the time. It would be a shame if someone stole an unmarked service vehicle. She walked to the door of the office. You have 5 minutes to decide. After that, I come back in here and we continue our official interview. She left, closing the door behind her. Ronan sat in the sudden silence. The weight of the choice was immense. Safety, or a suicidal mission into the darkness beneath Paris. The face of Julian Calloway, the terrified boy, flashed in his mind. Then the cold, ancient smile that had replaced it. It wasn't a choice, it was a duty. He stood up and walked to the door. He was no longer an architect. He was not a prisoner. He was the last warden of a forgotten war, and he was going hunting. Chapter 8: The Empire of Bone. The darkness in the ossuary was not empty, it was full. It was full of the weight of 6 million souls, their bones stacked in meticulous decorative patterns, walls of femurs, pilasters of tibias, friezes of grinning skulls that stared out into the eternal night with empty sockets. It was a monument to order, a city of silence. It was perfect. Odd Nurok stood in the center of a small crypt, a circular chamber where the skulls were arranged in the shape of a barrel. It had walked for hours through the unlit tunnels, leaving the public sections far behind, navigating the labyrinthine quarries with an unerring sense of direction. It had found the heart of the ossuary. This was its throne room. It had spent the first few hours in stillness, completing the integration. The last echoes of Julian Calloway were gone. The vessel was a quiet, perfectly functioning machine. Now, it was time to establish its domain. It placed a hand on the wall of skulls. It did not feel bone. It felt a network. Each skull was a terminal, a silent repository of a life's experience. The residual psychic energy was faint, degraded by time, but there was so much of it. It was a vast, quiet library. The Shaper closed its eyes and reached out, not to a single skull, but to the entire network at once. It sent a pulse of its own consciousness through the walls of bone, a single, pure note of its being. It was an announcement, a declaration of sovereignty. I am here. This place is mine. The response was a sigh, a psychic whisper that gusted through the tunnels, stirred from a century of sleep. The combined, faded consciousness of millions of the dead acknowledged the new presence. The empire of bone had a new emperor. A change began in the chamber. The air grew cold, the temperature dropping until a fine frost started to form on the skulls. The silence deepened, becoming a palpable presence, a pressure on the air. In the center of the room, the darkness began to congeal. It thickened, swirling like smoke, coalescing into a shape that was not quite a shape. A column of pure shadow, a tear in the fabric of the visible world. This was its anchor, a direct conduit to its own nature, a wellspring of its power. From here, it could begin to touch the world above. It started small. It extended its senses up through the meters of rock and clay into the city. It felt the rumble of the metro, the thrum of the power grid, the web of fiber optic cables. It chose a single thread, the electrical system of the 14th arrondissement. It nudged it. In the apartments and bistros above, lights flickered. Televisions turned themselves on and off. The digital clocks on ovens began to run backwards. It was a minor, playful disruption, a child testing the limits of a new toy. It tried something more complex. It found the telecommunications network. It listened to the river of voices flowing through the wires. It dipped a finger in, tasting the data. It found the emergency services dispatch. It saw the patterns of police cars moving through the city on a digital map. It saw a cluster of them around the Denver-Trotcher Row station. They were looking for the vessel. They were an annoyance. With a simple thought, a gentle push on the data stream, it altered the map. The police cars were now directed to a false alarm, a non-existent bank robbery on the other side of the arrondissement. It watched them go, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction moving through its cold consciousness. The world of men was so fragile, so easily manipulated. Its systems were a house of cards. It spent several hours in this state, exploring, experimenting. It learned it could influence the flow of water in the pipes beneath the streets. It could whisper into the insecure baby monitors of 1,000 apartments. Its voice, a meaningless, unsettling static that made infants cry. It was learning the pressure points of the city. Its explorations were interrupted by a new sensation, a presence, another consciousness moving through its domain. It was not the clumsy, blind intrusion of the police. This was something else. It was focused, deliberate, and it felt familiar. Nurok withdrew its senses from the city and focused them inward on the tunnels of its new kingdom. It perceived the intruder as a single point of light, moving steadily through the darkness. The light was faint, but it was burning with a strange, determined energy, and it was carrying something, an object that resonated with a cold, hateful frequency, the frequency of its old prison. Kurdrek. The name surfaced from the assimilated memories of its former jailer, Eve, the lineage of the wardens, the architects of its cage. One of them was here, in its home, hunting it. A new sensation registered in the Shaper's consciousness. It was a complex, layered emotion, drawn from the dregs of Julian Calloway's psyche but amplified by its own alien nature. It was annoyance, mixed with a predator's thrill. The game was not over. A piece was still on the board. Odd Nurok considered its options. It could simply leave, find another nexus. But this place was perfect. It would not be driven from its throne so easily. And this warden, he was an insult, a remnant of a past it had escaped. He needed to be erased. It would not confront him directly. Not yet. The vessel was precious. It would use the environment. Its new kingdom would defend its king. The Shaper reached out again, not to the city above, but to the bones around it. It poured a measure of its power into them, not just to listen, but to command. Throughout the ossuary, a deep, resonant hum began to build. The skulls, frosted with ice, began to vibrate. The whisper of the dead grew into a low, mournful moan that echoed through the labyrinth. The very geometry of the tunnels began to shift. Passages that were straight began to curve. Tunnels that led forward now looped back on themselves. The Shaper was turning the catacombs into a weapon, a non-Euclidean trap from which there could be no escape. It created guardians. It found the skeletons that were still mostly intact, the ones forgotten in the dark corners of the quarries. It reached into their marrow, into the memory of their structure, and pulled them to their feet. They were not living, not undead. They were puppets of stone and will, their movements silent and precise. They began to patrol the tunnels, their empty eye sockets glowing with a faint, cold light. In its throne room, Odd Nurok stood before the column of pure shadow. It was ready. Let the warden come. Let him wander the impossible halls of his own tomb. Let him face the silent guardians of a dead empire. The Shaper was curious to see how a creature of flesh and blood would break when faced with the true nature of its reality. The hunt had come home. Chapter 9. The Descent into Stillness. The stolen gendarmerie Peugeot was anonymous and efficient, its fuel tank miraculously full. Ronan drove through the night, powered by a desperate, adrenaline-fueled focus. He didn't stop, save for a quick refueling at a 24-hour petrol station where he also bought 2 bottles of water, a bag of dry croissants, and a can of dog food. Cheen, the scruffy terrier from Kurlan, sat silently in the passenger seat, a warm, living presence in the cold bubble of the car. The dog watched the dark landscape rush by, occasionally letting out a low whine, as if it could sense the wrongness of their destination. He reached the outskirts of Paris as the sky was beginning to pale from black to a bruised, pre-dawn purple. The city was a shock after the quiet dark of the countryside. It was a sprawling, sleeping beast, its arteries of light still pulsing. He navigated using his phone's GPS, the calm, synthesized voice an absurd counterpoint to the frantic beating of his own heart. He was a fugitive, driving a stolen police car into the heart of the nation's capital on a quest to fight a monster from beneath the earth. He felt a moment of dizzying vertigo, a sense that he had slipped through a crack in the real world. He parked the car several blocks away from the square Claude Nicolas Ledoux, abandoning it in a quiet residential street. The last thing he needed was for it to be spotted by a passing patrol. He grabbed his satchel, its weight now grimly familiar. "Veens," he said to the dog. He walked the remaining distance, the cool morning air sharp in his lungs. The city was slowly waking around him. Street sweepers hissed, the first delivery vans rumbled past. He felt conspicuous, a man walking with purpose while the rest of the world was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. He found the square easily. It was a small, manicured patch of green deserted at this hour, and in its center was the stone wellhead, the inspection shaft. A ring of fresh police tape, stark yellow against the gray stone, had been stretched around it. Ronan ducked under it without hesitation. The heavy iron lid was still pushed aside, the black hole gaping like a wound in the earth. The air rising from it carried the scent he now recognized as the entity's domain: cold stone, dampness, and a profound, ancient stillness. He knelt at the edge, peering down. A simple iron ladder was bolted to the side of the shaft, descending into the absolute dark. He took a deep breath. This was the point of no return. He turned to Chin, who was whining softly, its paws planted firmly on the grass, refusing to come any closer to the hole. "You stay," Ronan said, ruffling the dog's wiry fur. "You are a good guard." He wasn't sure if the dog understood, but it seemed to. It sat, its eyes fixed on him, a small, loyal sentinel. Ronan slung the satchel securely over his shoulder, took one last look at the waking sky, and swung his legs over the edge. His feet found the top rung of the ladder. It was cold and slick with condensation. He began to descend. The world above vanished. The faint light, the sounds of the city, the cool air, all were gone, replaced by a thick, oppressive darkness and a silence that was more than just the absence of sound. It was a presence. He pulled a small, powerful LED flashlight from his jacket pocket and switched it on. The beam cut a sharp, white cone through the gloom, illuminating the damp brick of the shaft and the rungs of the ladder stretching down into nothing. He was maybe 10 meters down when he felt it, a change in the air, a low, resonant hum that he felt more in his bones than heard with his ears. It was the sound from Eva's journals, the sound of the lock, but this was different. It wasn't the hum of a prison, it was the hum of a power source. Active, alive. His feet touched the bottom. He was standing on a pile of rubble and earth in a narrow, brick-lined tunnel. He swept the flashlight beam around. The tunnel stretched away in both directions, a perfect, straight line into the suffocating dark. Which way? He pulled out the obsidian compass. He held it in the palm of his hand, the flashlight beam illuminating its polished, black surface. The needle, which had been still, began to twitch. It swung back and forth slowly like a predator tasting the air. Then it settled, pointing down the left-hand tunnel. It was a weak pull, but it was definite. The hunt was on. He began to walk, his footsteps echoing unnervingly in the confined space. The air was cold and carried a mineral tang. The beam of his flashlight pierced the darkness ahead, revealing nothing but more tunnel. He felt an intense, primal claustrophobia rise in his throat. He was a man of open spaces and clean architectural lines. This place was a tomb. He forced the feeling down. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. After walking for what felt like an eternity, the brick tunnel opened into a larger space, carved from the raw limestone. The air changed again. It became colder, and the low hum grew subtly louder. He was entering its territory. He swept his light across the walls and stopped, his blood turning to ice. He was no longer in an empty quarry. He was in the ossuary. The walls were made of bones, skulls and femurs and tibias stacked with an artist's precision, stretched away into the darkness beyond his light. They stared at him from all sides, a silent, countless audience. He was in the empire of death. He checked the compass again. The needle was vibrating now, its pull stronger, pointing deeper into the labyrinth of bone. He pressed on, moving through narrow corridors lined with the dead. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. He was a single, living spark in a universe of silent, ordered decay. He came to an intersection of several tunnels. He paused, shining his light down each one. They all looked the same, a maze. He consulted the compass. The needle was spinning, a frantic, useless blur. Ronan understood. It knew he was here. It was blocking him, confusing the very energy he was using to track it. He was blind. He switched off his flashlight, plunging himself into absolute blackness. He needed to think. The compass was useless. His eyes were useless. He stood in the total, silent dark and tried to remember Marguerite's words. Look for the signs, the cold places, the wrongness in the geometry. He extended a hand, running it along the wall of bones. They were cold as expected. He moved to the entrance of the tunnel to his right and held his hand in the opening. The air was still cold. He tried the next one. The same. He moved to the third tunnel, the one straight ahead of him. He felt it instantly. A draft. A current of air that was degrees colder than the ambient temperature. A breath from a tomb within a tomb. He followed the cold. He walked for several more minutes, the beam of his flashlight jiggling ahead of him. The tunnel began to curve, which was wrong. These quarry tunnels were supposed to be straight, following the seams of limestone. He kept going, trusting the cold. The tunnel ended abruptly in a solid wall of bone, a dead end. Frustration and a spike of fear coursed through him. It was playing with him, toying with him like a cat with a mouse. He was trapped, lost in an impossible maze. He slammed his fist against the wall of skulls. The impact was dull, unsatisfying. But one of the skulls shifted under his blow. It tilted sideways, revealing a sliver of deeper darkness behind it. Ronan stared. He pushed at the skull. It moved easily, as did the ones around it. They weren't mortared in place. They were just stacked like loose bricks. He pulled a few of them out, creating a small opening. He shone his light through. It was not a solid wall. It was a screen, and behind it was another chamber. He worked frantically, pulling more skulls and femurs away, the bones clattering on the stone floor. He made the opening large enough to squeeze through and clambered into the space beyond. He was in a small, circular crypt. The walls here were also made of bone, but the arrangement was different, more ornate. And in the center of the room, the darkness was not complete. There was a shape, a column of something that was blacker than the surrounding black, a pillar of shadow that seemed to drink the light from his flashlight. It twisted and swirled, and as he watched, a single skeletal hand, made not of bone but of pure, solid darkness, reached out from it towards him. The hum was deafening now, a soul-shaking vibration that resonated deep inside his chest. This was it, the anchor, the heart of its power. He stumbled back, his hand flying to the satchel, fumbling for the dagger. He was not ready. He was supposed to find the host, not this tear in reality. As he scrambled for the weapon, a sound from behind him made him freeze. A dry, scraping sound. The sound of bone sliding on stone. He spun around, shining his light back towards the opening he had made. Blocking the way was a figure. It was a human skeleton, its bones yellowed with age. But it was standing. It was moving. And in its empty eye sockets, 2 points of cold, blue light flared into existence, fixing on him. It took a silent, deliberate step into the room. From the tunnels beyond, he heard more scraping, more silent footsteps. An army of the dead, animated by a single, malevolent will, was coming for him. He was trapped in the throne room of a god, and its royal guard had just been summoned. Chapter 10. The City Holds Its Breath. Inspector Isabelle Renaud stood in the Catacombs Command Center, a modern, subterranean office buried near the official entrance. On one wall, a huge digital map of the public access sections glowed with green lines and tourist tracking data. On another, a far older paper map was pinned, showing a section of the Grand Réseau Sud, the Great Southern Network, with a large, dark red circle drawn around the area where the sensors had failed. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and bureaucracy. "Still nothing," said Sergeant Matthew, his eyes glued to a monitor displaying static-filled feeds. "The team has reached the perimeter of the outage. They say the air is cold, unnaturally so, and they hear a noise, a low-frequency hum." "Keep them there," Isabelle ordered, her voice tight. "They are not to enter the dark zone without my direct command." She was not sending her men into a situation she didn't understand. Not after Le Goff's suicide note. Not after Kerdrek's insane, chillingly consistent story. She was a juggler, trying to keep a dozen objects in the air at once. Officially, she was coordinating a search for a missing person, possibly a killer, in the Paris catacombs. She had filed the paperwork, cited national security to get the section closed off, and was feeding plausible updates to her superiors, who were already growing impatient. Unofficially, she was terrified. The city above was beginning to twitch. In the last 12 hours, the 14th arrondissement had been plagued by a series of bizarre, low-level incidents. A localized power grid failure that corrected itself after 10 minutes. A water main that burst, flooding a street, only for the flow to stop inexplicably before the emergency crews arrived. Hundreds of calls to the phone company reporting strange, whispering static on the lines. The incidents were all officially logged as minor, unrelated malfunctions, but Isabelle had plotted them on a map. They all occurred within a 2-kilometer radius of the dark zone in the catacombs. It was as if a stone had been dropped in a pond, and the ripples were spreading. Her phone buzzed. It was a direct line from the prefect of police. She took a deep breath and answered. "Renaud, The prefect's voice boomed, impatient and angry. "What is this circus at Denfert-Row? I have the mayor on the line asking why a section of a major tourist attraction is closed. The media are starting to sniff around. You told me this was about a missing British national. Find him or reopen the tunnels. Today." "Monsieur le Préfet," Isabelle said, choosing her words with extreme care, "we have reason to believe the subject is unstable and potentially dangerous. The situation is delicate. We are taking precautions." "Delicate? It is a public relations nightmare. You have 6 hours, Inspector. Find your boy or I am sending in my own tactical unit to sweep the area and this whole mess will be your head. Is that clear?" The line went dead. Isabelle stared at the phone. 6 hours. A tactical unit, armed with machine guns and flashbangs, barging into a situation that seemed to operate on the laws of physics-defying horror. It was a recipe for a slaughter. She looked at the map at the red circle, the epicenter. Ronan Kerdrek was in there, a fugitive, a madman, and she was beginning to fear her only hope. She had let him go, a desperate, irrational gamble. She had no idea if he had even made it to Paris. For all she knew, he could have been picked up by a highway patrol outside Orleans. The warrant for his arrest was active. Every cop in France was looking for him. She had thrown her only wild card onto the table and had no idea where it had landed. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low and sharp, "get me everything you can on Ronan Kerdrek. I want his architectural theses from university, his family records, his phone records for the last year. And I want to know everything about his gray tuncle, not just the police report on his death. Tax records, military service, property deeds. Dig deep. Dig until you find something that makes sense of this." She needed a thread, a piece of rational information in a world that had ceased to be rational. An hour later, Matthew brought her a slim file and a cup of coffee. "There is not much, Inspector. Kerdrek is clean, a respected professional. His gray tuncle, Eve, is more interesting. He was an engineer, worked for the Ministry of Infrastructure for 30 years. He took early retirement in 1988. After that, he bought the property at Karnak and his life becomes very quiet. He paid his taxes. He had no living relatives besides his brother, Jean-Luc and Ronan. According to a note in his tax file, he applied for a research grant in 1992. It was denied." "What was the research?" Isabelle asked, seizing on the detail. Matthew read from his screen. "A proposal to study telluric and subsonic resonance in pre-Roman megalithic structures. The review board dismissed it as pseudoscience." Isabelle felt a chill. Pseudoscience, or a science no one else understood. And Ronan Kerdrek, anything from his university work. One thing, his final thesis. It won an award. It was a structural analysis and proposal for the restoration of a medieval church, the Church of Saint-Sauveur in Dinan. Isabelle's mind, trained to find connections, seized the name. Saint-Sauveur. Wait. She went to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She pulled up the file on Alain Legoff, the dead professor from Nantes. He had published dozens of academic papers. She scanned the titles, and there it was. A paper from 2005, co-authored with a historian from the University of Rennes. The Warden Legacy, an examination of crypto-religious iconography in the churches of Upper Brittany. "Matthew," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "get me that paper now." A few minutes later she was reading. The paper was dense, academic, and utterly chilling. It detailed a theory that certain families in Brittany, the wardens, had, since the Middle Ages, embedded secret warnings and diagrams into the architecture of the churches they helped build. It was a silent, coded message, passed down through generations, hidden in plain sight in the stone and glass. The paper analyzed the unusual geometry of the arches in the church of Saint Sauveur in Dinan, the very church from Ronan Kerdrek's thesis. It argued the geometry wasn't a stylistic choice, but a diagram, a schematic. A schematic for a lock. Isabel pushed back from her desk. It was all real, the wardens, the lock, the legacy. Ronan Kerdrek hadn't been indoctrinated by his uncle. His entire life, his entire profession had been an unconscious preparation for this moment. He wasn't just a descendant, he was a key. Her phone rang again. It wasn't the prefect. It was an unlisted number. She answered, her heart pounding. Renaud. "Inspector." The voice was Ronan Kerdrek's. It was strained, breathless, and echoed as if he were in a large, empty room. "Inspector, I'm in. I've found the heart of it, but I am trapped. It has guardians, things." He paused, and she heard a dry, scraping sound in the background. "It's changing the maze. I can't find my way back." "Kerdrak, where are you? Give me a position." "I don't know. I went through a false wall, a crypt. There's a pillar of shadow here, and the bones are moving." His voice was filled with a desperate urgency. "You cannot send your men in. They are not armed for this. They will die. It is a trap for them." "What do you need?" Isabel asked, her mind racing. "A map, the old maps. The ones from before the ossuary was consolidated in the 18th century, the original quarry maps. Eve had copies at Curland, but I didn't have time. They must be in the city archives. This place. Its power comes from the new, ordered geometry of the bone walls, but its weakness is the old, chaotic geometry of the original quarries. I need a path through the old ways, a path it can't control." "How can I get it to you?" "I have my phone, but the signal is almost gone. There's a service conduit near where I am. I can see the cables. Maybe if you can get the map to the command center, broadcast it on a low-frequency signal. I don't know if it will work." Another scrape closer this time. "Inspector, I don't have much time." The line went dead, dissolving into static. Isabel stood frozen for a second. The choice was no longer abstract. It was here. It was now. Follow procedure and sacrifice her men and the city, or trust the madman in the maze. She looked at Matthew. "Get me the City of Paris Historical Archives. Tell them it is a national security emergency. I want every quarry map of the Grand Race au Sud from 1600 to 1750, and get me a communications engineer. I don't care where you find one. Get one. Now." She was no longer a cop following a lead. She was a general in a war she didn't understand, and her only soldier was a fugitive architect, trapped behind enemy lines, about to be overrun. The city above held its breath, unaware of the battle for its soul being waged in the kingdom of bone beneath its feet. Chapter 11. The Geometry of Escape. The crypt was a tomb inside a tomb, and Ronan was the only living thing in it. The skeletal guardian advanced, its movements unnervingly silent, its lit eye sockets promising a cold, passionless violence. Behind it in the tunnel, the scraping sounds grew louder, closer. More were coming. Ronan scrambled backwards, away from the creature, his eyes darting between the advancing skeleton and the swirling column of shadow in the center of the room. The pillar of darkness was the source, the heart. He had to get past the guardian and do something. The ritual from the journal required the host, not this abstraction of pure malevolence. Was there another way, a way to disrupt it? The skeleton lunged. It didn't move like a human. It flowed, its joints articulating with an unnatural fluidity. Its bony fingers reached for him. Ronan dodged to the side, the creature's hand scraping against the stone wall with a sound like grinding teeth. He needed space. He needed time to think. He threw the first thing his hand found on the floor, a loose femur, at the creature. The bone shattered against its ribcage with a dry crack, having no effect. The skeleton simply reformed its stride and came at him again. Ronan retreated, circling the pillar of shadow. The air near the pillar was so cold it burned, and the low hum vibrated through his entire body, making his teeth ache. He felt a wave of dizziness, a mental disorientation, as if his own thoughts were being unraveled by the pillar's presence. He had to stay away from it. The guardian cornered him against a wall of skulls. It raised its arms to grab him. In a surge of pure, panicked instinct, Ronan lunged forward, not away from the creature but towards it. He ducked under its outstretched arms, his shoulder colliding with its legs. The impact was like hitting a structure of dry sticks. The skeleton's legs buckled and broke apart, femurs and tibias scattering across the floor. The torso fell, the skull hitting the stone with a hollow clatter. The blue light in its eyes faded and died. For a moment Ronan stood panting, a wild surge of triumph coursing through him. He had won. Then the scattered bones on the floor began to tremble. They slid across the stone, reforming, knitting themselves back together with a series of sickening clicks. The skeleton reassembled itself at his feet and began to rise. He couldn't fight it, he couldn't destroy it. More scraping from the entrance. Two more skeletal guardians were now squeezing through the opening he had made, their eyes glowing with the same cold blue fire. He was outnumbered, trapped. He looked around the crypt, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. His only hope was escape, to flee, find a defensible position and contact Renaud. He ran for the opening in the wall as the first guardian rose to its feet. He scrambled through, the bony fingers of the creature snatching at his ankle, catching only air. He was back in the main tunnel. He shone his light down the corridor. A dozen more of the bone soldiers were marching silently towards him. He turned and ran in the opposite direction, deeper into the maze. He ran blindly, taking turns at random, his only guide the desperate need to put distance between himself and the silent, relentless army. The hum of the central chamber faded behind him, but the oppressive geometry of the maze remained. Tunnels that should have been straight twisted back on themselves. He passed the same distinctive pattern of skulls on a wall 3 times, despite never turning back. The Shaper was hurting him, playing with him, ensuring he could never find his way out. He found a small side alcove, a dead end barely big enough for him to squeeze into, and huddled in the darkness, trying to control his ragged breathing. He pulled out his phone, one bar of signal flickering like a dying heartbeat. It was now or never. He made the call. After the line went dead, he was left in the dark, his hope a flickering ember. Would Renaud believe him? Could she even do what he asked? He waited. Every scrape in the distance was his approaching doom. Every drip of water was a footstep. The minutes stretched into an eternity. His phone's battery was critically low. Then a faint crackle from the phone's speaker. It wasn't a call. It was a sound. A high-pitched, oscillating tone like an old dial-up modem. Isabelle was trying. She was broadcasting something. Ronan held his breath, praying the signal would hold. The tone continued for a full minute, then stopped. A moment later, his phone chimed with a new file notification. A data packet had been received. His battery icon flashed red and died. He fumbled in his satchel for his portable power bank, his hands shaking so badly he could barely connect the cable. The phone screen lit up. The file was there. He opened it. It was an image, a scanned section of an ancient hand-drawn map covered in faded ink and water stains. It was overlaid with a faint, glowing red dot. You are here. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through him. He studied the map. It showed the tunnel he was in, but it also showed others, ghost tunnels drawn in a different ink, passages that had been walled up, forgotten, the old ways. According to the map, there was a sealed passage directly behind him, in this very alcove. He turned and ran his hands over the wall of bones. It felt solid, but the map insisted. He pushed, he pried. His fingers found a loose section of mortar between the femurs. He dug at it with the tip of the strange dagger. The old mortar crumbled like sand. He pulled a bone free, then another. Behind them was not rock. It was empty space. A dark, narrow opening, an artery the shaper had forgotten to block. He could hear the scraping of the bone soldiers approaching his position. He didn't have much time. He squeezed into the opening, his clothes snagging on the rough-hewn rock. The passage was tight, little more than a crawl space. He moved on his hands and knees, the flashlight held in his teeth, the map a glowing talisman in his hand. Behind him, he heard the bone soldiers arrive in the alcove. He kept crawling, moving through the suffocating darkness of the forgotten tunnel. The air here was different, stale but free of the entity's oppressive hum. He was outside its direct control. He crawled for what felt like a kilometer, following the faint lines on his phone screen. The old tunnel twisted and turned, bypassing the new, impossible geometry of the ossuary. He was navigating the city's hidden skeleton, its true, chaotic heart. Finally, the map showed him emerging into a larger space, a section of the public catacombs, but one that was currently closed for renovation. He found the exit, another bricked-up wall. He began to work at the mortar, his muscles screaming in protest. He broke through into a tunnel that was lit by emergency lighting. He was back in the 21st century. He looked at his phone. There was a message from a number he didn't recognize, from Isabelle. Map sent. Tactical team is moving on my authority in 90 minutes. They will not listen to me after that. This is your only window. I have a car waiting for you. A black Citroen. Avenue Rene Cody by the reservoir. The keys are under the mat. It has what you need. Godspeed, Kurdrek. Ronan stared at the message. What he needed. He looked down at himself. He was covered in filth and bone dust, his hands raw and bleeding. He was exhausted, terrified, but he was free. He had escaped the maze. But the hunt wasn't over. It had just entered its final, desperate stage. He had 90 minutes to find a way to confront the Shaper, not in its fortress of power, but on his own terms. He began to run through the empty, lit tunnels, following the signs for the exit, a ghost emerging from the empire of the dead. Chapter 12. The Tools for the Job. Ronan emerged into the Paris night like a man clawing his way out of his own grave. He stumbled from a service exit of the catacombs, a small, unmarked steel door set into a high wall, and found himself in a deserted side street. The air was cool and tasted of rain and exhaust fumes. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The silence of the city, a stark contrast to the oppressive, humming stillness of the world below. He leaned against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He had escaped, but the relief was fleeting, immediately replaced by the crushing weight of the deadline Isabel had given him. Less than 90 minutes. He checked his phone. The power bank had given it life, but for how long? He found Avenue Rene Cody on the map. It was a 10-minute walk. He moved through the sleeping streets, a grimy, wild-eyed specter. A few late-night commuters stared at him from their cars. He ignored them. His world had contracted to a single, sharp point of focus, the black Citroen. He found it parked under a street lamp by the gated entrance to the Montsoiris Reservoir. It was an anonymous sedan, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. He knelt, his joints protesting, and felt under the driver's side mat. His fingers closed around a key. He got in, the clean, neutral smell of the car a world away from the dust and decay he had been breathing. He sat for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel, his mind racing. Isabel had said the car had what he needed. What could she possibly have found? He looked in the back seat. There was a large, heavy-duty duffel bag. He pulled it onto the passenger seat and unzipped it. The contents made no sense. There was a coil of thick, industrial copper cable, several meters long, a heavy, rubber-handled sledgehammer, a car battery fully charged with crocodile clips attached, and a small, padded case. He opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was a taser, the kind used by law enforcement, with 2 extra cartridges. He stared at the objects. A hammer, a battery, a taser. It looked like the toolkit for a bizarre kidnapping. What was he supposed to do with this? His Grey-Tunkle's ritual required the dagger, the locket, the compass. It was a delicate metaphysical procedure. This was brutal, modern hardware. He slumped back in his seat, a wave of despair washing over him. It was a miscalculation, a guess by a desperate cop who didn't understand the rules of this war. These tools were useless. He was about to start the car, to drive aimlessly into the night, when his eyes fell on his own satchel, lying on the floor. the satchel containing Eve's work. He had been so focused on the one ledger with the ritual instructions that he had forgotten about the dozens of other journals, the reams of notes. He pulled out the most recent journal, the one his uncle had been writing in when he died. He flipped through the frantic, ink-smeared pages, looking for anything, any clue. He found a section near the end, one he had skimmed over in his initial panic at Kurlan. The handwriting was almost illegible, the entry written under extreme duress. The unbinding requires proximity, a state of incapacitation, but the shaper will not allow it. Its control of the host vessel is absolute. A direct assault is impossible. A new approach is needed. The old ways are too slow, too subtle for what is to come. Ronan's breath caught in his throat. He read on. The binding is not just metaphysical, it is bioelectrical. The entity overwrites the host's neural pathways, creating a resonant field. This field must be broken. A powerful, chaotic energy surge, introduced directly to the host's nervous system, could momentarily disrupt the connection. A lightning strike, a massive electrical discharge. It would not unbind the entity, but it might sever its control of the vessel for a few crucial seconds. It would create a window, a chance to perform the ritual. Ronan looked from the journal to the equipment in the duffel bag. A car battery, a taser, a powerful, chaotic energy surge. It wasn't a mistake. It was a stroke of genius. Isabel hadn't just given him tools. She had read the files, she had understood the problem, not just the mystical dimension, but the physical, electrical one. And she had found a practical, modern solution. She had weaponized his Grey-Tunkle's theory. But there was still a problem. The host. How could he get close enough to use the taser? The shaper would never allow it. He flipped through the journal again, his eyes scanning for anything about weaknesses. He found a small, underlined passage. The entity's strength is its focus, its alien intelligence. But its weakness is the vessel. The human body is fragile. More importantly, the human mind, even one that has been overwritten, leaves echoes. Strong, traumatic, emotional memories create deep psychic grooves. If the entity were to encounter a powerful environmental stimulus that resonated with a core memory of the host, it could, in theory, cause a momentary confusion, a system conflict, the ghost of the host fighting the operator. A core memory, a powerful stimulus. How could he know what that was for Julian Calloway, a boy he had never met? Ronan's mind raced back to the news reports he had read, the details of the missing persons case. Julian was a backpacker, an artist. He had been camping. What else? The articles had quoted his parents. They had mentioned his hobbies. He loved sketching, history, and something else. He was a musician. He played the guitar. His parents had said he had been saving up for a specific vintage instrument. It was a thread, a thin, desperate thread. Ronan started the car. He wasn't driving aimlessly now. He was driving with a terrifying, half-formed plan. He pulled his phone from the charger. The tactical team was moving in just over an hour. He had one chance to set the stage. He drove through the deserted streets of Paris, a man on a mission that was part exorcism, part bomb disposal. He needed a location, not one of the shapers choosing, not a place of power, but the opposite, a place of no power, a neutral ground, a place that was loud, chaotic, and jarringly human. He found it near the Seine, a pedestrian underpass, a concrete tunnel covered in layers of graffiti, reeking of damp and neglect. It was a place utterly devoid of historical resonance or geometric power. It was just an ugly, functional scar on the city. Perfect. He parked nearby and began to prepare. He took the copper cable and, using the sledgehammer, drove one end into the soft earth of a small patch of grass, grounding it. He ran the rest of the cable into the underpass. He set up the car battery. He checked the taser's charge. One piece was missing, the stimulus, the music. He used his phone, the battery ticking down again. He searched for music shops. Most were closed, but he found one, a small, independent place in the Latin Quarter whose website proudly stated it had a 24-hour automated rental service for traveling musicians. He drove, his heart pounding with the urgency of the clock. He found the shop. A small, brightly lit booth like an ATM was set into the front wall. He used his credit card, praying it hadn't been canceled yet. He scrolled through the options. He was looking for something specific, not just any guitar music. He needed a sound, a powerful, emotional sound. He found a collection of live recordings from a famous rock festival. He downloaded a track known for its raw, explosive guitar solo, a torrent of pure, emotional energy. He raced back to the underpass. He had everything he needed. He had the tools. He had the theory. He had the bait. Now he just had to call the monster into his trap. He sat in the stolen car, the silence of the night pressing in. He took out his gray Tunkel's locket. Inside, as the journal described, was not a picture but a tiny, razor-sharp flake of obsidian, a sliver from the prison itself. The journal called it the calling shard. When held by a warden, it created a resonance that was an irritant to the shaper, a challenge it could not ignore. He took a deep breath, clutching the locket in his hand. He closed his eyes and thought of the entity, of the cold, arrogant intelligence in Julian's eyes. He focused all his fear, his anger, his determination into that single point. I am here. Come and finish this. For a long time, nothing happened. He began to think it had failed, that the entity was too strong, too focused on its own plans. Then he felt it, a drop in temperature, a familiar, low hum vibrating through the frame of the car. He opened his eyes. Standing at the entrance to the graffiti-scarred underpass, shrouded in shadow, was the figure of Julian Calloway. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted in that curious, inhuman way. It had heard the call, and it had come. Chapter 13. A Song in a Concrete Room. The figure of Julian Calloway walked slowly into the underpass. The concrete tunnel amplified the sound of its footsteps, each one a small, deliberate report in the dead air. The sodium lights cast a sickly orange glow, making the vibrant graffiti on the walls look like peeling skin. Adnurok surveyed the scene, its ancient consciousness trying to parse the ugliness, the sheer lack of design. This place was a null point, an architectural dead spot. It was an insult. Ronan stepped out of the shadows at the other end of the tunnel, placing himself between the entity and the street. He held the taser in one hand, the heavy-duty cable connected to its base snaking back towards the car battery. In his other hand, he held his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "It's over," Ronan said, his voice echoing in the confined space. It was a foolish, cliched thing to say, but he needed to fill the silence. The shaper stopped. The ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. "Over." Its voice was a perfect mimicry of the boy, but with all the warmth and life hollowed out. "It has not yet begun, little warden. Did you think this crude geometry could trap me? This place has no power." "It's not for you," Ronan said, his heart hammering. "It's for him." He pressed the play button on his phone. The sound that erupted from the phone's small speaker was tinny but immense. It was the roar of a festival crowd, and then, cutting through it like a bolt of lightning, the opening chords of a ferocious, overdriven guitar solo. It was a wall of pure, chaotic human passion, a sound forged in rebellion and joy and rage. For the first time the entity faltered. The body of Julian Calloway flinched, a violent, involuntary shudder. Its head snapped to the side, its eyes wide. The confident, predatory smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound confusion. The ghost of the host fighting the operator. Ronan saw his chance. He raised the taser. "Julian," he shouted, hopping the name itself was a weapon. The shaper roared, a sound that was not human. It was a blast of pure static, of raw will that made the lights in the underpass explode in a shower of sparks. The tunnel was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the distant streetlights. "The boy is gone," it shrieked, its voice distorting, fluctuating between Julian's tenor and a deep, grating bass. "There is only me." It lunged, crossing the length of the tunnel in a terrifying, fluid blur. Ronan fired the taser. Two small darts, trailing thin wires, shot through the dark. They struck the entity's chest. Ronan squeezed the trigger, sending 50,000 volts of chaotic electricity surging into the vessel. Julian's body convulsed. A brilliant blue light arced across his torso, illuminating the tunnel in a series of strobing, epileptic flashes. He was thrown backwards, his head hitting the concrete wall with a sickening crack. He collapsed to the ground, twitching. The guitar solo on the phone still screamed, a soundtrack to the exorcism. Ronan dropped the taser and ran forward, pulling the dagger and the silver locket from his satchel. This was the window. Seconds, he had seconds. He knelt beside the unconscious form of Julian Calloway. The boy's face was slack, peaceful. For the first time since Karnak, he looked like himself. Ronan followed the ritual from the journal. He pressed the cold, flat side of the dagger against Julian's forehead. He held the silver locket, the resonant sync, against his chest. He began to speak the words from the ledger, not in a mystical chant, but in a clear, firm voice, as if reading a technical instruction. "GT daily de la pierre, GT rens à la chair, par la feret par la sang quella chemin soit rompu. I unbind you from the stone. I return you to the flesh. By iron and by blood, may the path be broken." He had to ground the entity. He grabbed the end of the thick copper cable he had laid out and pressed the bare wire against the locket. The moment it made contact, all hell broke loose. A wave of force erupted from Julian's body, throwing Ronan back. The air grew impossibly cold. A black, oily mist began to pour from Julian's mouth and nose, a physical manifestation of the shaper. It swirled in the air above the body, a shrieking, chaotic cloud of shadow. It was unbound, but it was not defeated. The cloud solidified, coalescing into a shifting, non-Euclidean shape of wrong angles and impossible limbs. It was a nightmare-given form, a creature of pure, hateful energy. It towered over Julian's still form, its attention now fixed entirely on Ronan. It had been tricked, cast out of its perfect vessel, and it was furious. Ronan scrambled backwards, grabbing the sledgehammer. It was a pathetic, primitive weapon against a cosmic horror, but it was all he had left. The entity descended upon him. Just as the wave of shadow was about to engulf him, the screech of tires echoed from the mouth of the underpass. Two powerful headlights flooded the tunnel, pinning the creature in their beams. A car door slammed. "Kurdrak, get the boy." It was Isabelle Renaud. She stood by her car, her service pistol gripped in both hands, her face a mask of pale, determined terror. She fired 3 shots into the swirling mass of shadow. The bullets passed through it without effect, but the sound, the percussive violence of it, made the creature recoil for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Ronan would get. He ignored the entity and scooped up the limp form of Julian Calloway, throwing the boy over his shoulder. He was surprisingly light. Ronan ran for the car, his lungs burning. "Go, go," Isabelle yelled, getting back into the driver's seat. Ronan threw Julian into the back and dove in after him, pulling the door shut as the shadow entity smashed against the side of the car, making the entire vehicle groan in protest. The window next to Ronan's head crazed into a spiderweb of cracks. Isabelle stomped on the accelerator. The tires screamed as the car shot out of the underpass and into the sleeping streets of Paris. In the rear-view mirror, Ronan could see the cloud of black energy pouring out of the tunnel, a furious, vengeful stain on the night. They had done it. They had Julian. But the Shaper was free, unbound, and now it had nothing left to lose. Chapter 14. A New Warden. The car sped through the deserted boulevards of Paris, the first light of dawn painting the sky a soft, forgiving gray. In the back seat, Julian Calloway stirred, groaning. Ronan leaned over him, checking his pulse. It was steady. The boy was alive. "He's waking up," Ronan said. Isabelle glanced in the rear-view mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Is it him?" "I don't know." Julian's eyes fluttered open. They were blue, filled with a vast and terrified confusion. He looked at Ronan, then at Isabelle. He tried to sit up, his gaze darting around the unfamiliar car. "Where? Where am I? What happened? I was at the stones." His voice was weak, hoarse. It was his own. "It's okay," Ronan said, his voice gentle. "You're safe now." Isabelle pulled the car over on the Pont de la Concorde. The Assemblée Nationale stood silent on one side of the river, the Place de la Concorde on the other. The city was holding its breath, poised between night and day. She turned in her seat. The entity, the shadow, what was that? I thought the ritual was supposed to. The ritual was to unbind it from the host, Ronan explained, his voice heavy with exhaustion. To separate them. I never thought about what would happen to it afterwards. It's free now, untethered, and we made it angry. As if on cue, a low hum began to vibrate through the bridge. The streetlights flickered and went out. Across the river in the grand buildings of the city, lights began to die, window by window, plunging the heart of Paris into a spreading, unnatural darkness. A wave of silence rolled across the city, the distant, ambient hum of urban life simply ceasing. A form began to coalesce in the middle of the bridge, a few hundred meters away. The swirling, furious cloud of shadow. It was larger now, drawing power directly from the dying city. "It's not over," Isabel whispered, a note of finality in her voice. "It followed us," Ronan said. "It's drawn to the host, or to me, to the locket." The shadow began to drift towards them, a slow, inexorable tide of annihilation. "What do we do?" Isabel asked. Ronan looked at the dagger in his lap, then at the terrified, shivering boy beside him. He thought of his great uncle, alone in that dusty room for 50 years, of the dead professor in Nantes, of the impossible choice Isabel had made. The legacy of the wardens wasn't just about locking things away. It was about responsibility. A new, terrible clarity settled in his mind. "There's only one way," he said, his voice calm. "It needs a vessel, it needs a prison. The old one is broken, it needs a new one." Isabel stared at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "No, Kerdrek, no." "The lock at Karnak was made of stone aligned with the earth," Ronan said, thinking aloud, the pieces clicking into place. "It was designed to hold the shaper, but it failed. It needs a different kind of prison now, not a static one, a dynamic one, a conscious one that can fight back." He picked up the dagger. "The ritual can be reversed. The journal described it. The binding." He looked at Isabel, his eyes filled with a grim resolve. "It's not just a legacy of blood, Inspector. It's a choice." He turned to Julian. "I'm sorry," he said to the boy. Then he pressed the tip of the dagger into his own chest, just enough to draw a single drop of blood. He held the bloody dagger up. "G. M. offer a la pierre, G. me lia el lomber." I offer myself to the stone. I bind myself to the shadow. The approaching entity stopped. It seemed to sense the shift, the invitation. The raw, untethered fury was replaced by a focused, predatory interest. It saw a new host, a warden, a prison of will and intellect, a far more interesting cage than the simple boy. The cloud of shadow surged forward, engulfing the car. For a moment there was only darkness and a deafening roar of static. Isabel cried out, shielding her eyes. Julian screamed. Ronan felt an indescribable cold, a consciousness of infinite alien geometry pouring into him, trying to overwrite him, to consume him. But he was ready for it. He did not fight it like a cornered animal. He met it like an architect studying a blueprint. He found its pathways, its structure, and he began to build walls. He used his own memories, his knowledge of stress and load, his love for the solid, measurable world as bricks and mortar. He built a labyrinth in his own mind, a prison of logic and reason to contain the chaos. The shadow receded, pouring not away but into Ronan. The car was left sitting on the bridge in the sudden, bright light of the rising sun. The streetlights flickered back on. The ambient hum of the city returned. Isabel looked at Ronan. He was deathly pale, his hands trembling, but he was upright. He met her gaze. His eyes were his own, but in their depths she could see a cold, ancient light like a star trapped in a deep well. He was the host now, the warden and the prisoner, locked in an eternal struggle in the cage of a single mind. "Kurdrak," she whispered. "I'm here," he said. His voice was steady. "But I'm not alone." He looked at his own hands, flexing the fingers. "It's quiet for now. It's learning the shape of its new prison." The hunt was over. A different, internal battle had just begun, one that would last for the rest of Ronan's life. Isabel took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at the city, coming alive in the morning sun. No one would ever know what had happened. No one would know how close they had come to being reshaped. She put the car in gear. "What do we do now?" she asked, the question encompassing everything: the boy in the back, the man beside her, the secret they now shared. Ronan looked out at the city, at the world he had saved. "Now," he said, a faint, tired smile on his face, "we drive, and I watch the walls." Chapter 15. The Shape of the Cage. The drive was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the soft, ragged breaths of Julian Calloway in the back seat. The sun was fully risen now, glinting off the Seine, turning the gray stone of Paris to a warm, deceptive gold. It was a beautiful morning, an obscene contrast to the reality inside the car. Ronan sat motionless in the passenger seat, his hands resting on his knees. He felt hollowed out, scoured. The cataclysmic energy of the binding had left him feeling like a building whose foundations had been shaken to powder and then replaced with something alien. He was still himself. His memories, his thoughts, his consciousness were his own, but he was no longer alone in the space behind his eyes. It was not a voice, not yet. It was a presence, a vast, cold weight sitting in the back of his mind. He could feel it exploring the confines of its new prison, testing the walls of his will, tasting his memories with a detached, ancient curiosity. He felt a phantom chill, a constant internal winter that had nothing to do with the temperature of the car. He had to consciously maintain his focus, to keep the architecture of his own mind solid, to prevent the prisoner from finding a crack in the walls. It took an immense, unrelenting effort, like holding his breath underwater. "Here," Isabel said, her voice pulling him back. She turned into a narrow street and descended into a subterranean parking garage beneath a nondescript modern apartment building. She killed the engine. The sudden silence was a shock. "Where are we?" Ronan asked. "A place that doesn't exist," she replied, her tone flat and exhausted. "The department keeps a few of these, unlisted properties for protected witnesses or undercover operations. No one will look for us here." She got out and opened the back door for Julian. The boy flinched, scrambling away from her until he was pressed against the opposite door. "Who are you people? What do you want?" "We're the people who got you out," Isabel said, her voice softening slightly. "You were taken, Julian, by a kind of cult. They drugged you. You've been through a lot. We're going to help you." It was a good lie. Simple, believable. It explained the memory loss, the fear, the disorientation. It cauterized the wound without having to explain the impossible weapon that made it. They took him upstairs to a small, functional apartment on the third floor. It was furnished with clean, impersonal furniture, and had a view of a quiet inner courtyard. Julian collapsed onto the sofa, pulling a blanket around himself, his eyes still wide with a trauma he couldn't name. Isabel made coffee, the familiar domestic ritual, a fragile shield against the morning's insanity. She handed a cup to Ronan. Their fingers brushed. Her hand was warm. His was ice cold. She pulled her hand back as if she'd received a static shock, her eyes meeting his for a brief, telling moment. She understood. She sat at the small kitchen table opposite him, while Julian drifted into an exhausted, troubled sleep on the sofa. "The official report," Isabel began, her voice a low murmur, "will state that Julian Calloway was found disoriented but unharmed. He was the victim of an obscure doomsday cult whose leader, Elaine Legoff, committed suicide. The other man, Jean-Pierre Duval, was an unfortunate victim who got too close. You, Ronan Kerdrak, were a private citizen who got involved and obstructed my investigation. You will be reprimanded, given a fine for the stolen vehicle, and released. The case will be closed as a tragedy of fanaticism." She had constructed a fortress of paperwork to hide the truth. It was elegant, comprehensive, and a complete fiction. "And the tactical team?" Ronan asked. "I sent them in," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "They found the catacombs empty, save for some strange temperature drops and a few broken skeletons. I told them the cult must have cleared out. They think I'm a paranoid hysteric who wasted their time. My career took a hit today, but we are all still alive." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the quiet ticking of a wall clock. "What does it feel like?" Isabel finally asked, her gaze unwavering. Ronan looked down into his coffee cup. "It feels cold. It's intelligent. It isn't raging. It's exploring, looking for weaknesses in the design. It is patient. It thinks in terms of geology, not heartbeats. It can wait for 1,000 years for a wall to crumble." "Can you control it?" "I can contain it," Ronan corrected. "For now, it takes concentration. I can't let my guard down, ever." He looked up at her, the cold light in his eyes more pronounced in the apartment's sterile lighting. "If I ever seem like I'm not myself, if I say things, do things that don't seem like me, you have to know it might not be me. It might be the prisoner looking through the bars." This was the new reality, the new set of rules. Isabel nodded slowly, understanding the terrible weight of what he was saying. She was no longer just a cop. She was his failsafe, his warden on the outside. "There is one more thing," Ronan said. He reached into his satchel and took out the dagger, its dull gray blade seeming to drink the light in the room. He laid it on the table between them. "This was used to unbind it. It can also be used to end the imprisonment permanently." He was giving her the kill switch, the final, terrible tool. He was trusting her to be his judge and, if necessary, his executioner. Isabel stared at the knife. It was heavier than any piece of evidence she had ever handled. It was a promise and a burden. She reached out and wrapped her hand around its grip. The metal was cold, but it was an honest, physical cold. She looked at Ronan, and in her eyes he saw an acceptance of the vow he was asking her to make. Later that day, they put the plan for Julian into motion. Isabel made a call. A few hours later, 2 plainclothes officers, men she trusted implicitly, arrived. They were told the official story. Julian, now sedated with a mild tranquilizer from a medical kit Isabel had in the apartment, was transferred to a private clinic. He would wake up there, be debriefed by psychologists who were fed the official cult narrative, and eventually be returned to his family in England. His memories of Karnak and Paris would be a confused, drug-fueled nightmare that he would be encouraged to forget. His part in the story was over. He was free. Before they took him, Ronan stood over the sleeping boy for a moment. He felt a strange mixture of pity and envy. Julian would go on to live his life. He would recover. He would fall in love, have a career, grow old. The vessel was empty, but it was also whole. That evening, Ronan and Isabel stood on the small balcony of the apartment, looking out over the quiet courtyard. The city was preparing for another night, blissfully unaware. "I should go back," Ronan said, "to rents, to my office, to the life I had." "Can you?" Isabel asked. "I have to," he said. "The prison works best when the warden is occupied. I need to draw plans, calculate load-bearing walls, lose myself in the solid, measurable world. It strengthens my own walls." He turned to her. "Thank you, Isabel, for believing the madman in the maze." "I didn't believe in the maze," she said softly. "I believed in the pattern, and I believed in the man who was trying to navigate it." He left an hour later. Isabel drove him to the train station Montparnasse, the place where the entity had arrived in Paris. As he stood on the platform, waiting for the train back to Rennes, he felt like a man who had lived 100 years in the space of a few days. He was no longer just Ronan Kerdrek, architect. He was a cage, a living, breathing prison of flesh and bone and will. He boarded the train and found a window seat. As the train began to move, pulling him away from Paris, he closed his eyes. He could feel the cold presence stir within him, drawn by the motion, the pathways of iron. It was not a violent stirring. It was curious, watchful. "This world is vast," a thought whispered in his mind. The thought was not his own. It was a calm, analytical statement formed in a language older than words. Ronan did not panic. He opened his eyes and looked at his reflection in the darkening window. He focused on his own face, on the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He marshaled his thoughts, his memories, the solid facts of his own existence. He built his walls, brick by mental brick. "Yes," he thought back, a silent response directed inward, "and you will see it all from in here." The cold presence receded, retreating to its corner of his mind. The silence returned. It would be a long watch, a long, cold, and lonely watch that would last the rest of his life. But as the train sped through the French countryside, carrying him home, Ronan Kerdrek knew he was ready. The warden was at his post. The end.